Welcome back. Time for some background info. A long time ago, after I finished watching a playthrough of the first game, it came to my attention that Danganronpa had released a sequel. Not only that, but the time I found that out, it had a series of disjointed Korean translations. So I basically just watched them all and then never touched the game again. But from what I remember, Danganronpa 2 is actually pretty enjoyable. A lot of the characters were memorable to me when I first saw it, and the story, while a bit confusing near the end, didn't really bother me all that much. Now keep in mind, when I say this, it was at a time before the game was localized. I'm only talking about my first impression of it. But what's interesting about this is that I wasn't the only one who walked away with this outlook of DR2. As I mentioned in the review of the first game, this game is basically the classic scapegoat for anyone trying to defend this series. Whenever the franchise comes under fire from myself or others, this title seems to always come up at some point as a counterexample. But doesn't anyone else find that strange? That out of all the available games and releases for Danganronpa, this is the only one that gets brought up as the good title? I mean, after looking at the first game, it was a pile of shit from almost every angle, but somehow its sequel is better to the point of being this pinnacle of the series? That sounds like something we better test. This is Danganronpa 2, Goodbye Despair. Oh, well, same shit, different day. Time for some mandatory exposition. Danganronpa 2's general structure is similar to the first game. Like DR1, our story is still going to center around a class of 16 ultimate students forced to take part in a kill game run by Monokuma. However, where DR2 differs is in how it introduces its setting and characters to us. Let's start with the first big change, the location of the killing game. The quirk for this game this time around is that it takes place on what's ostensibly a school field trip to a place called Jabberwock Island. What I mean by this is that a lot of questions about the world come up within the first few minutes of gameplay. This is because, for the first time in the series' history, the prologue has been unofficially divided into a daily and deadly life segment. In this case, I'll refer to these halves as the pre- and post-introductions of Monokuma. There are a lot of good things to come out of telling the prologue in this way. The first is that you can skip a large portion of Chapter 1 where the students search the school for an exit. This portion of the game took up a lot of time that could have been focused on fleshing out the characters in DR1, so it's a welcome change to see that it's been removed for DR2. The second good thing is that it meshes the time spent on exploring the environment with character introductions. Again, this ties in with the first point, but it's a massive time saver in a very efficient way of presenting each ultimate, as opposed to just having them all stand in front of a door while you just go down the line of who's who. Finally, these students can actually act like students. I brought this up as a closing point in the last review that the first game could have benefited from us being able to connect with these characters outside of the confines of the dire situation they're thrown into. In summary, the biggest thing this prologue does right is that it's long, informative, and does a good job of presenting a lot of the overarching questions you'll get the answers to later in the game. For those of you who don't understand why I value these longer main events over free times, we'll talk about that much later, so just hold on for now. Anyway, this is where my compliments for this part of the game stop, because it all just kind of repeats a lot of the mistakes with its cast that I faulted DR1 for having. The ultimates in these games need to stop being based off of circumstantial or vague shit. First of all, we have Fuyuhiko, the ultimate Yakuza. This is the same situation as Mondo, where the guy is basically a criminal but the school lets him in anyway. He's also an ultimate in a position of power that could easily be stripped away from him at any time. If Fuyuhiko is arrested, jailed, or killed, his title is going to be fucking meaningless because he can't do anything with it. At that point, it'll just go over to whoever's doing more work in his absence. Or if he's murdered while doing a job in the city somewhere, what'll happen then? You can't exactly be the ultimate Yakuza when you're dead. Now obviously if anyone dies, they're not really going to be an ultimate in that thing for very long. But you have to at least question why the school would even grant people with a position that can change on a whim because of who they are. Another example of this is Sonia Nevermind, the ultimate princess. Here we have another instance of someone's ultimate being dependent on a job or position that can be removed through death or resignation. It's not the same as someone like the ultimate swordswoman whose ultimate is based entirely on her skill with the sword and not some random occupation she has. And don't even get me started on Nagito, the new ultimate luck. He's such a bag of shit that we're gonna wait until the game ends to talk about him because Jesus Christ. Anyway, the last two things I want to briefly touch on before we get into the real meat of the game is our main character and the Monokuma introduction. This time around, our protagonist is named Hajime, and he's basically an ultimate nothing. He doesn't have any special talents that we're aware of, so that's about it. I won't make any statements about whether I like him or not until we actually see how he acts as the game progresses. As for the Monokuma introduction, it serves its purpose, but there really isn't much to talk about. It's just meant to set up the events of the first chapter, so let's keep things moving.
Danganronpa.
Chapter 1 is a continuation where the prologue left off. The new killing game was just announced, and now we're treated to Hajime reacting to it in his room. His sentiments are echoed the following day when Togami decides to call a meeting in the dining hall about the issue. Aside from one instance of Mikan, falling over, we're basically treated to the main formula for each case. Now if you don't understand what I mean by this, let me explain while nothing of note is going on. In DR2, and any other DR game with Monokuma's killing game in it, you're gonna see the story progress as follows. There are a total of 3 daily life segments before a body is discovered. The first day will usually serve to establish a change in the setting and provide bits of information pertaining to the mystery surrounding wherever the students are playing the killing game in. In the context of Chapter 1, the first day happened to be the prologue. The following day will usually be reserved for the motive of the case or some kind of drama being developed that may have been established during the previous day. In general, this section will have the motive become more of an afterthought in comparison with whatever events decide to grab the student's attention next. Finally, on the last day, a murder occurs and a body is discovered. Before this happens, there will almost always be a big event of some sort that's completely different from the status quo. These big events can vary in terms of how important they are. Apart from some slight deviations in the events of days 1 and 2, this is basically the average Danganronpa formula for telling stories loosely summarized. Using some examples from DR1 to help me explain my point a bit better, the big event for case 1 was Sayaka and Naegi switching rooms, while the big event for case 5 was the student body attempting to raid the headmaster's room. The reason I bring this up now is because I think it's important to clarify that, despite slightly railing on this in the last video, DR2 sticking to a formula isn't inherently a bad thing. There are lots of games I like that are formulaic as fuck, but have refined it in such a way where it's enjoyable to play regardless of this fact. But as I explained while talking about DR1, the format these games use can potentially be detrimental to their overall quality if executed poorly. This will become much more relevant as we progress through the game, especially when we talk about what the daily life segments end up getting used for. For now, keep this in mind for later because the logical consequences of this system are going to be quite surprising when you compare them with what the fans have said about the game in the past. Anyway, let's wrap this up. Fat Togami takes the center stage of this chapter as he appoints himself as the leader of the group and leads everyone to the center of Jabberwock Island to talk about a plot device that'll become important later. The next morning, he decides to host a dinner for unknown reasons, but it's presumed that it's to help the students get their minds off their current situation so they can work together as a group or something. In planning the party, Nagato loses a game of straws and gets thrown onto cleaning duty, and Teruteru offers to cook for him. And the party finally starts. Fuyuhiko declines the invitation to join everyone else because he's a weenie, and Chiaki and the rabbit who no one cares about are given the job of watching the front door in case Monokuma comes in to disrupt the party. I don't know what good that'll do though, since it's pretty clear that he's capable of teleporting anywhere he wants on the island, but whatever. Eventually there's a blackout where Mikan decides that we need to see her act like shit twice in the same chapter after the lights come on. Then this happens.
Let me just step right in. I got things to advance. I'm an innovator, baby, change the world. Fortune 500 before you kiss the girl. I'm a pink, you're a nerd. I'm slick, you're cheesy. Beating you was never too easy.
So already, the guy who took center stage ended up getting killed like in the last game, and now we finally get to see if DR2's improved its investigation since DR1. We've had a relatively decent start, but nothing praiseworthy has happened yet aside from a lot of exposition. Danganronpa 2's got a lot of hype behind it. Now that we've finally gotten to the meat of the game, I'm sure we'll be able to see what all the fuss is about. So let's get started. How do you make something this bad this early? The murder premise is so stupid. Like, why is Togami underneath the table? What circumstance would make him end up there? The idea that the case is trying to push forward is that he most likely went under there when he saw the knife with the glowing paint on it. But think about how dumb that is. Instead of just lifting the tablecloth, kneeling, and grabbing the knife from the outside, he decided to go underneath the table like a fucking toddler. Even if he wanted to stop someone from getting the knife or something, that person isn't gonna end up under the table when they want to grab that shit. They just have to peel off the tape and slide the knife out while standing on the outside. So if Togami wanted to stop whoever was gonna retrieve it, he just had to use his night vision goggles to find the bastard and knock him out of the way. From every conceivable angle, this crime doesn't make any goddamn sense. It's also implied that the blackout was intentional, which suggests that whoever put the knife under the table was gonna use it to their advantage. Except what good would that fucking do? If you want to stab someone in the dining hall, you'd have blood all over you, especially since the weapon is basically a glorified butter knife. How the hell would you avoid getting caught with a crime as simple as that? And what's going on with Hajime? Did he leave his brain at home today or what? When he looks at the knife, he asks, how did it get placed here if they were pat-downs? but he just answered his own question. They were pat-downs. It was impossible for anyone to smuggle it in with Togami confiscating it at the door, since he was trying to make sure nothing lethal could get in. Therefore, whoever was here before everyone else had to have set it up, which leaves only Nagito or Teruteru. Also, speaking of Togami making preparations, he really didn't do a very good job at it. Before the actual party started, Hajime and he had to look around the building for any possible weapons. This is because of a note Togami received telling him that a killing would begin, so he had every reason to be vigilant. So why did his vigilance extend to only 2 rooms? The only 2 places he checks are the kitchen and the dining hall. Why didn't he check places like the storage room, the bathrooms, or the office with the AC in it? Did he really trust Nagito's cleaning that much that he would overlook a clear murder threat? And not only that, but he didn't even do a good job at searching the 2 areas he ended up searching in the first place. He tries to confiscate a bunch of skewers from the chef, but overlooks one that went missing on the kitchen list. Why wouldn't he be suspicious of the chef if one of his tools went missing in the first place? Again, if someone threatened to kill someone else in the cast and he didn't want that, recovering that lost weapon should be the #1 priority. As for the dining hall, why did he just stop looking around at the food? Why wouldn't he even look under the tables? Based on how he ended up, he obviously didn't have any hand in setting any of it up. What a weird lapse in judgment. The only thing he accomplished in that room was stuffing his fat fucking face on some meat skewers. I don't even try to bring up Nagito's luck as an excuse for any of this. We'll talk about why his superpowers are bullshit later on. For now, let's get back to the case. And in case you weren't aware of this, Hajime's a dumbass. Mikon tells him that the weapon that killed Togami had to have been 5mm in diameter, like some kind of ice pick. Since there aren't any ice picks in the hotel, the most likely weapon that could have done it was one of the iron skewers. Guess what? We already know one of them was missing from the kitchen at the time. Hajime doesn't think about any of this though, so once again, we have yet another lazy DR protagonist. And some of this shit is really easy to figure out too, like the blackout for instance. After searching the area Togami kept most of the skewers in, you find out about a circuit breaker that was too high up for any human to reach. Since you don't find evidence that anyone set it off, it's pretty likely that some other method was used. That method would have been the irons found in the storage room, since all 3 of them were turned on. That combined with the AC going off right before the lights turned off would suggest that that's a plausible way the blackout was staged. The only person who probably set that shit up was Nagito, because he was the only person besides Teruteru, oh my god, that name, who had a full idea of the layout of the map because of his job. You can also figure this out by connecting the fact that he was the only one in the room who could have set up and actually used the knife too. It's really shitty that I'm making all these connections that our main character refuses to make because we're not in a class trial. You'd think that after the success of the first game, they'd learned their lesson at this point. He won't even do simple shit like ask questions about the testimonies he's given. Ibuki ends up telling him that she could hear and identify everyone's voices when the blackout occurred. This is because she's the ultimate musician. But when she tells you her testimony, this weird contradiction comes up. She apparently heard Teruteru at one point say something as if he were in the room, but he wasn't there before the actual blackout, which means he would have had to have come in at around that time. The problem with this though is that she never claims to have heard the door to the room open. If she's supposed to have superhuman hearing or something, then how did she miss a door opening and closing? Either Teruteru wasn't in the room, or we shouldn't immediately trust this one girl's testimony and shovel it into our evidence without thinking about it for more than— oh, no, alright. I guess we're keeping it then. Can he not act willfully ignorant for 1 second and actually think about what he's discovering at the scene? The trial that he apparently dreads so much would come to an end much faster if he did, so it's not like he has any logical reason to avoid using his fucking brain for once. It's just another frustrating mess where I know the class trial for this case is going to be needlessly drawn out for no reason because this case was poorly written. And don't even get me started on some of the stupid horseshit he actually does hold on to. Like, why is Mikon's upskirt moment in my evidence? What purpose is that supposed to serve? And why does he even bother plotting out people's positions in the room when it's abundantly obvious that they're all innocent? For once, I just wish this shitty game would stop wasting my time with all this garbage thrown around every 5 seconds. Now I have to go into yet another class trial in Danganronpa, where the main character won't talk about the actual piece of evidence that can establish the culprit's guilt. Instead, we're probably just gonna fuck around with every other piece of evidence instead until the game feels like ending everything. But we won't know until we see it for ourselves, so let's move on to the trial. Hopefully it's not that bad. Okay, so the first debate is about why Togami ended up under the table in the first place. This ends with the students figuring out that he moved there on his own to get the knife with the glowing green tape on it. But again, I have to ask how the fuck this makes any sense at all. The guy's crawling around like Tommy Pickles when there were several other more efficient ways he could have gone about getting it. The objection to this point doesn't make any sense either. Peko says that it was impossible for Togami to have gone after the knife specifically because he couldn't have seen in the dark while the power was out. From there, you have to show her the night vision goggles to prove that it was possible to see during the blackout. But why the fuck was she even butting in to begin with? The only thing she did during the investigation was loiter around in front of the circuit breaker and shit in the bathroom. And why does Hajime even have to explain this to her to begin with? Anyone with fucking eyes could see the goggles if they bothered to look at the body for longer than a second, so why do I have to point it out and not someone else? There's absolutely no reason for me to be explaining this when the other half of the cast can do it just fine. Also, why do Sonia and Ibuki agree with her? They were there for the body discovery. They should have seen the goggles themselves. You have to be fucking blind to miss that shit. And it only gets worse from here too. After you make that point, Mahiru decides to challenge me to a sword fight, I guess, because she can't conceive of a way for Togami to have brought the goggles with him. Instead, she says that the killer must have used them. But what reason does she have to think any of this? Look at where she was standing during the investigation. If she had just turned her head to the right, she would have seen the very evidence needed to destroy her argument. And not only that, but does she really need to explain how anyone other than Togami could have done this? Where the hell would a student coming to the party hide it before getting patted down at the door? Is she trying to say that Nagito or the chef could have hidden it under the table or something? Nagito couldn't have committed the crime because he didn't have any blood on him when the lights turned on, and Teru wasn't even in the room until after the body was discovered. Is she just acting woefully stupid or what? And finally, she was in the same room as the case the night vision goggles came from. The same case Togami said belonged to him. The same case that specifically had a holder for the night vision goggles. The same case that was lying, and I shit you not, a little bit to the right of where she was standing. Mahiru, this stupid bitch, would have had to have honestly just stared straight at the wall the entire time for her to have missed that. She even created an entire layout of the room for Hajime and still managed to miss this piece of evidence. Like, what? And even if I ignore all these points, I still have to ask, who fucking cares what she thinks? I don't need her dumbass opinions to solve the case at all. I wish these stupid debate minigames would just go away already, because there's absolutely no reason for them to be there when the trials run on a majority vote. The context for this doesn't have any rhyme or reason to it either. Mahiru had an objection to what Hajime was saying, so I got forced into a sword fight with her. But when Peko had an objection to Hajime's point about the knife, I got thrown into another debate? I mean, if the debates are just the same as the minigames, then why choose one over the other? Once again, the structure of these trials is all over the fucking place. They even kept in the problem where someone presents a point, then tosses it to me for some reason. The other students are wondering why Togami took all those precautions before the dinner party started. Obviously, Hajime and Nagito were the ones who found the death threat, so this would be a good point for Hajime to step in and present it to the court. But instead, Nagito butts in and says that Togami was anticipating a crime taking place that very night. Then, it gets thrown to me to solve. Why couldn't the guy just present the evidence since he was the one who made the claim? And why present the possibility, then toss it over to Hajime? Why not have Hajime make the point from the get-go? It's such a simple solution to this weird-ass problem that the game has that it makes me wonder why it even bothers in the first place. This entire exchange is just me acting as a middleman for his point. What's worse is that his explanation is stupid too. He says that Togami's plan was to have everyone in a close proximity to one another so he can keep tabs on them. But if that were the case, why would he leave Chiaki outside when Fuyuhiko, someone who'd been ranting about killing people, refused to join the party? She didn't even need to be there. Monokuma had full surveillance over the entire room with one of his cameras. It's not hard to believe that he had access to it. Having anyone stand outside on the lookout for him would have been a lost cause. And why did he let Peko just go off on her own to the room with the circuit breaker? What if Nidai wanted to kill someone and wandered off into the hallway to do it because Peko was there? Or, what if Peko wanted to deck the chef while he was in the kitchen? Then what? Why wouldn't he have someone accompany anyone planning on going solo anyway? For example, instead of letting Teru wander off to the kitchen alone, what if he went with him or sent someone to supervise him? Then he could have avoided this entire case. The guy was sent a threatening letter, so he was apparently on high alert for this shit. But this whole scenario collapsed in on itself because he's a fucking idiot. Well, whatever, that's what happened, so I guess we'll just move on. So Sonia steps up and asks how the killer navigated it in the dark, since only Togami had night vision goggles. This is a shit question because it assumes that the killer was the one in the room. Since Hajime refuses to think outside of this narrow-minded bullshit with the blackout, we can't make one of the most obvious deductions in the case about people's alibis. This isn't even a case-breaking thing to solve. The entire trial would flow so much better if they just stopped wasting time on all this nonsense. They even have a whole debate on this, like what the hell is this? How come no one's presenting Mikan's autopsy report either? It proves definitively that the knife couldn't have been used to kill the victim. The devs know that a tutorial case doesn't have to be this long, right? All it has to do is just introduce the player to the basic mechanics of the trials in a timely manner. There's 6 chapters in the game, so it's not like it's gonna hurt anyone if one is shorter than the others. These people have no idea what they're fucking doing. It's so embarrassing. Look at the bloody mess underneath the table. Look at it! You want us to believe Togami was stabbed to death with that fucking butter knife that doesn't even match the victim's wounds? And you know what's even better? The topic they choose to dwell on instead is Peko's diarrhea episode. I shit you not, we're worrying more about a girl's shitting habits than we are about the actual crime itself. Fuyuhiko tries to say that the culprit slipped laxatives into the cooking. The proof that counters this is the fact that Akane didn't have to shit despite eating Teruteru's cooking too. But the real issue here is, why is someone who never showed up to the dinner party trying to educate people about what happened at the dinner party? He was never there! His words are fucking meaningless! Like, Jesus Christ, man! Once you disprove his shitty argument, the students have a debate about the blackout. Mahiru suggests that a power surge took place, which she confirmed by presenting the irons that were in the storage room. Then for some reason, Nida gets triggered and challenges me to a sword fight. During the investigation, he was either in the bathroom or in the hallway. He was nowhere near the crime scene or the storage room, so why is he even talking? Why did I get thrown into a game mode for a piece of evidence I could just show him anyway? Why do I even need to slice his statements either? How do I lose an argument if I get outshouted by someone? Why can't I just wait for him to finish his point and just show him the AC timer that disproves what he's saying? And look, I get it. They tried to have more debate-centered game modes added to the game. It's just that the one I got thrown into was completely fucking unnecessary, because all you really have to do is shut up and show the evidence when he's done talking. What's worse is that after I finish yelling at him, I'm left with one simple question. Why didn't Togami check the fucking storage room in the first place? All this fat ass had to do was open a door and look inside the room for 1 second to see 3 irons turned on at the same time for apparently no reason. What if there was a weapon in there? What if Teruteru hid something among all the towels? I mean, if Nagito is out of the question apparently, then you could still search the area in the grounds that the chef could have been up to something. The victim in this case is so fucking stupid. This is all common sense. If you want to make sure all harmful objects are removed from a building, then you check every room in the building. This one minor decision could have saved his fucking life. At the end of that long train of autism, Hajime accuses Nagito of setting up the blackout. The only way I can describe what follows is that Kodaka looked at the Sayaka reveal in case 1 and said, nah, that isn't long enough, so he made this nonsense. This absurd amount of time is spent trying to prove Nagito fucked with the lights, even though whether or not he did is irrelevant for reasons I already explained earlier. One long speech later, and Mikon finally jumps in and presents her autopsy report, and then Ibuki's account is presented soon after. After all this wasted time, we finally talk about what we should have been talking about from the beginning of the— Oh wait, no we don't! Instead we're trying to figure out what Nagito did. Why? Who gives a shit? Talk about how the chef was in the room. It's a huge contradiction. Why are you ignoring it? And besides, doesn't this account seem a bit unreliable to you? It's all from the perspective of this one random asshole at the time, and it contains a bunch of weird shit in it. I already talked about how she never heard Teruteru enter, but what about when Togami died? She never even heard him scream? Or was his first reaction when getting stabbed to shut up and say nothing? There wasn't even a grunt or any kind of reaction, just pure silence. Doesn't anyone in the court find that odd? I mean, I'm all for using it as proof, but for fuck's sake, no one is critically analyzing it. It's hard to summarize what happens next because, well, nothing happens. They all sit there fucking cumming themselves because Luckman destroyed the fabric of time to fail a murder plot. Now, big surprise, everyone's stuck again even though they have the exact lead they need to move forward. And, Hajime's just sitting there and going, what? Trial suspended? What do you mean trial suspended? Monokuma Theater in the middle of a trial? What the hell is going on here? This case that shouldn't have taken more than 30 minutes to solve has an intermission? Is this some kind of sick joke? To have a tutorial case like this divided into 2 parts? Ugh, just whatever. I'm gonna ignore these transitions and just carry on with the case. When we re-enter the court, everyone's busy being stupid again. Mikon, of all people, finally mentions that Nagito, for being the killer, doesn't have any fucking blood on him. Which should have been the first observation you, out of everyone in the room, should have made during the whole hour they spent misunderstanding the crime. But anyway, after connecting the fact that a tablecloth was used to block the blood splatter, we finally get to how the murder was committed. Naturally, the game is hinting that you should present the gaps between the floorboards. Since Mikon's autopsy said that the weapon had to be long and thin, and the killer wasn't anywhere in the room, he had to be somewhere no one else could see him. Obviously, the answer would be under the floorboards, which we have in my inventory. Except what's weird is that Hajime isn't presenting this shit despite being asked about it a moment ago. Actually, he's just standing there with his eyes closed and aw, fuck you, man! Why do they have to bring this hangman shit back? There's no reason for me to use it. I have evidence that shows where the killer could have been. I need to present that and talk about Gundam's earring. That's it! This serves no fucking purpose in the game other than to delay my progress! Even after you beat this segment, Hajime goes on to talk about the thing he could have presented beforehand. From there, Gundam tells you about the hidden path he found in the storage room that lets you go beneath the floor of the party building. Another question I have is how come I couldn't have found that? I searched the room during the investigation and it wouldn't let me search behind anything. Like what? Did Hajime really just come in, stand at the doorway and go, yeah, that's good enough? Like, oh my god, this case is so fucking terrible. How do they do it? How do they manage to top themselves with each prompt? And holy shit, Mahiru, the feminist icon, comes in and decides she needs a chance to be an idiot too. So the chef says that the culprit had to be someone who wasn't in the room, implying that because Ibuki heard him, he has an alibi. I already explained that this isn't true, so I won't harp on it this time. Then Mahiru butts in and says that based on her pictures, Fuyuhiko is the most likely suspect, except there's two things wrong here. Number one, the pictures prove jack shit. The only people with alibis are the ones who were there before and during the blackout. Everyone outside of the room is a possible suspect. The chef's excuse that he went to get food is meaningless because that didn't even happen within the time frame of the blackout. Even if you look in the pictures, he's nowhere to be found. And number two, we already have proof that Fuyuhiko didn't do it. He was seen by Chiaki outside, and he was never seen entering the building at any point in time. She can also confirm that there was no way of getting under the floorboards from outside, so he couldn't have done it. The reason why I bring these 2 points up is because the people who should be presenting them don't. If Hajime brought up the first point, he'd have moved everyone's attention to a legitimate possible suspect. But since he's so fucking dumb, he chooses not to. And for the second point, Chiaki isn't even the one who says anything. It takes an entire debate, and for Hajime to point it out, for her to actually give her testimony. I'm getting so fucking tired of this already. Why am I presenting the testimony of someone who's in the same room as me? It makes no sense why Hajime is arbitrarily chosen as the one to do it for everyone. All I'm seeing right now is this jumbled fucking mess of shit priorities and awful reasoning. They even divided a simple ass crime into 2 parts. 2 parts! Is this really what I have to go through for another 5 cases? Anyway, I'm gonna skip ahead again since nothing important really happens. He ended up proving that the culprit used a portable stove from the kitchen to light his way to the storage room so he could get under the floorboards. Then finally, Hajime accuses Teruteru of being the culprit in this case, which means he had to be the one who went under the floorboards the entire time. The kids bicker a bit more when Ibuki's account comes up again. Hajime counters it like he should have earlier and presents the gap in the floorboards. The chef decides that it's time to spurg out now, so he goes apeshit. Of course, the trial could end here because you could bring up the point about the door, and who am I kidding? This is Danganronpa we're talking about. It can't be that easy or else the game would work. No, instead we need to do it in the gayest way possible. Hajime says that if Teruteru was in the dining hall at the time, he would have known what pose Mikan was in when she upskirted everyone in the room. This reasoning is fucking terrible. The chef says it slipped his mind, and boom, the argument has just been shit on. Mahiru tries to butt in and says that because the chef's a perv, he should have remembered. But what if he didn't? Then what? All he has to say is that he was distracted by the dead body that appeared soon after. Mikan's little ass salad pose was too insignificant to remember due to the murder. Seriously, that's how flimsy it is. This is the opposite of definitive proof. Oh god, now he's having them go back to the murder weapon. There's no reason to do so though. Sure, Hajime's argument was shitty, but it was enough to convince everyone that he did it. So it's majority rule, remember? You can end this case now. It doesn't matter what he thinks at this point. And holy shit, another hangman's gambit? It just leads to Hajime remembering that a skewer was missing from the kitchen equipment list, which for fuck's sake, why didn't he remember this earlier when he first got Mikan's autopsy report? It's like the case wants to make a point about how shitty it is at the last second. And now look at this. We have a new version of Guitar Hero for this game. There's no reason for this to be a thing at all. I've cornered the culprit already. There's no point arguing any further. And why do they bring climax reasoning back? Why do I have to re-explain all this shit to the culprit? Who the hell is this supposed to be cornering? Once you confirm a guilty party, you vote for them. Stop wasting all my time with this one stupid game mechanic for fuck's sake. Eventually, once you waste more time, everyone votes for the culprit and the trial is over. Teruteru has a long speech about how his mom is dying of a disease or something, so he wanted to kill Nagito to get out. It's another lazy attempt at getting me to care for someone due to the free time system. Honestly, his only personality outside of this case was that he was a perv and thought of himself as a city boy despite being rural as fuck. He didn't even have an arc beyond trying to get Sonya to suck his dick, and I'm not exaggerating at all. He has multiple scenes where he either mentions fondling women or one of them sucking him off. I'm supposed to feel sorry for this stupid piece of shit who I barely knew even after the horrible trial I was forced to sit through. At some point, Chiaki says that Togami most likely saw someone moving under the floorboards, so he chose to die to protect Nagito from getting killed. I've already explained why him leaping under the table like a fucking kindergartner is ridiculous and how it could have been avoided, so I'll provide a different point. Togami, the person trying to protect everyone in the room from the killer, chose to stay silent about the killer when he saw him lurking beneath the floorboards. Like, what a good friend he is, throwing his life away without telling everyone else about the danger in the same room they were in. Just, fuck this case. Chapter 2 starts with a speech from Nagito that we'll talk about later, and moves into Hajime waking up the next day and arriving at the dining hall. It's at this point in the story where we've experienced several significant events. The first death among the cast has just taken place, and it was by one of your fellow students. So already we now have proof that anyone, given the right conditions, could snap at any minute and kill someone. Teru, in the last case, acted like everything was fine and just randomly chose to take someone's life because he couldn't take it anymore. Who's to say that no one else in the class could end up like him? Number 2, we've just experienced an execution of a beloved classmate who, despite committing murder, was still regarded by the other students as a friend. These are two people who, at least based on what I've read in the last case, had a significant impact on everyone else. Teru only cooked once, and it was only for him to commit murder, so I can't really think of a reason they'd latch onto him for anything. But Togami served a much more significant role in the case than him. If you think about it, the entire group structure has been completely thrown off. Their self-appointed leader died trying to save them from the very thing he was trying to prevent. Without one unifying force, how can a group like this remain together in a game like this? Not only is the group structure distorted due to the death of 2 other classmates, but their emotions should be distorted as well. If the cast wants to treat these guys like close friends, then this is a pretty significant loss, especially with how both of them went out too. If the general opinion of the class is that these killings are senseless, then we should at least see some reaction from the class regarding what happened. The reason I bring up these 3 points is because these events should dominate most of the following daily life segments for this chapter. Realistically, a friend getting murdered by another friend is not something you can just ignore. This has huge implications for the dynamics of our current group. The problem is that the game doesn't seem to agree with me. Sure, in the dining hall we get some lip service as to the fact that the last case happened, but that only lasts for a little under a minute. According to my footage, chapter 1 is discussed from 3:29 to 4:25, before it's interrupted by a joke about how Hiyoko smells bad. This is immediately followed up with a comment about Nagito's disappearance, an appearance from Monokuma, and the announcement that a new island's opened up. The only thing pertaining to the last case we get at this point is a few half-assed lines from Hajime about how everyone's basically distracting themselves from these very real and very pressing issues. There are so many red flags that came up as a result of the first murder, and people are just treating it like it never happened. What's sad is that the cast in the first game acted more rationally than these guys. It made sense in the game when people like Togami didn't trust anyone. After all, why would you? Anyone could be the killer. And after the first crime was committed, the reality of the game should have set in by that point. There's an air of suspense, albeit shoddily done, that's present in a trash game like that, but not in this game, which is supposed to be the quote best in the series. The main cast seems to be making their best effort to ignore everything going on at random, to the point where it goes beyond a coping mechanism because it's directly affecting my experience in the game. Hajime, in the prologue, was hesitant to trust his surroundings. The entire island was a mystery, and facts about the place they were on were inconsistent with what others knew about it. Things seemed too happy for him to just immediately go on board with the events that were taking place around him. So why doesn't any of this skepticism carry over to this chapter? How can a character, who was so quick to doubt his situation then, immediately trust everyone blindly now that he's been given ample reason to avoid doing so? Danganronpa 2 is a game that takes after the previous one's goals of having the player connect with characters both living and dead. How am I supposed to do any of that if he refuses to grieve for any of them beyond just acknowledging they exist? He refuses to think critically about the legitimacy of his fellow students despite all of them being completely untrustworthy because of the killing game. And when the entire cast and him go off and get sidetracked by new overarching plot elements that constantly interrupt the main events. We're dealing with another instance of the game mismanaging its structure and its cast because it's trying to adhere to this formula the first game established without deviating from it or building off of it in any way. But as I've established already, the first game is not a good starting point to build off of. If the system was inherently broken by design, why try to replicate it in the sequel without making any efforts for it to improve? As proof of this, I'd like to continue talking about the point I just mentioned, the one about new overarching plot elements sidetracking main events. There's a scene on the new island where the cast discovers a large building with the word future on it. It's then introduced to the cast that there's a group called World Ender who've managed to infiltrate the students as the traitor mentioned earlier in the game. So if there was any doubt before, it should be abundantly obvious that the people these students are interacting with are not entirely who they say they are. Except, instead of the game letting the characters deal with this new issue in any sort of interesting way, it shoves in this plot line where Kazuichi and Nekomaru captured Nagito and are holding him hostage in the room Togami died in. There's a brief dialogue where Fuyuhiko tries to call out everyone on their bullshit, but that just gets swept aside by Hajime in favor of more free time segments. Do you see what I mean now? Because the game has to have free time segments for character development, we can't spend any more time on this when that's exactly what we need right now. The fact that the entire cast just returns to the status quo is fucking insulting, because it looks like Kodaka isn't even trying anymore. Having prominent issues like what's come up recently get discussed by other characters would have been a great way to give us insight into how they think, as well as their different philosophies on who should be trusted in their little group. There could be division in the class, and arguments from both sides could be presented to where the player could have to actually think for once about who's right and who's wrong. There's no reason why the game has to work within the confines of this shitty formula like the one they came up with in DR1. It's actively ruining the game by making everyone act completely irrational and forcing me to take part in a game mechanic that's broken as fuck. Honestly, it's just one big mess. Later that day, we're treated to the motive for this case this time around. This time it's some kind of game Monokuma came up with called Twilight Syndrome Murder Case. This piques everyone's curiosity for a bit, which is nice since we see a bit of distrust among the students until Hajime plays it and people just stop caring the following morning. Once again, another rushed series of events ruining something that could have been good. The way the focus of the game shifts awkwardly to some stupid plan Kazuichi came up with is just really jarring too. He just butts in after this serious conversation about the game and basically offers Hajime to come look at a bunch of bitches in bikinis. Apparently a bunch of girls planned on going swimming at the beach together despite all this serious shit coming up, so good for them I guess. Since you can't decline his offer, you're forced to follow him to the diner on the second island until the events that lead up to the murder for the day occur. There's a shitty showcase of random girls in the cast in bikinis, and it ends with Hajime running to the building near the beach only to find our next victim.
Don't come near me, don't come near me.
Oppan Gangnam Style. Gangnam Style. Oppan Gangnam Style. Gangnam Style.
Before I go into this investigation, let me address one thing. I'm not coming at this from the standpoint of someone who has to solve how the crime was done. This is something DR's investigations seem to misunderstand actually, because they're not built in such a way where understanding what happened is integral to surviving the chapter. Because it's entirely based on a majority vote in a trial to prove who the killer is, if you can find one lead as to who could have done it early, you basically win. That's why whenever I approach these investigation segments, I always factor in the evidence to form a conclusion as to who could have done it. In my eyes, finding out who did it is all I need to do. Now that may seem obvious because duh, it's a murder mystery game. Well, our boy Kodaka didn't seem to get the memo on this one. Let's start off with the body itself. The cause of death was a single blow to the back of the head. There's a massive blood stain on the bat in the center of the room and another around the body. Whoever killed the victim would have gotten blood on some part of their body, especially since Mikan reveals that death was instantaneous, which means that the killer most likely moved the body against the door we found it leaning on when we first started. No one you talk to testifies to seeing anyone with blood on them apart from Akane, who has an alibi since she was training with Nekomaru, so it's safe to assume that whoever killed the victim probably washed it off afterwards. Since the showers at the crime scene were out of order, the culprit must have used something else. That something being the empty water bottles from the fridge in that same room. Which means whoever killed the victim would have been wet. Therefore, Pekko's the culprit. I know you're curious, so I'll just go ahead and say it. No, Hajime does not figure any of this out. In fact, he doesn't even focus on anything at the crime scene longer than a passing glance. He gets so wrapped up in this Twilight Syndrome murder case that he forgets, I guess. So much of this investigation is focused on solving the mystery presented in that game, to the point where I'm just being shown all these red herrings that are obvious as fuck if you thought about the actual case for more than a second. What's there to even say about any of this? This is fucking embarrassing. This game even tries to cover up some of this shit too. When you go to check out the shower room, you can't even inspect the shower itself. It won't even give you the ability to check if it's wet or not. The only thing you can do is let Akane talk about how a bunch of men back at her old house used to grope her while she shoves her vag in your face to check out a window. And no, that's not a joke, that actually happens. If the game isn't trying to cover its ass, it's using some of the most bizarre attempts at misdirection I've ever seen. There's a point in the case where you examine a mask, and Sonia creams herself because it reminds her of a serial killer. She says that it belongs to someone named Sparkling Justice, a vigilante who killed for justice or something. This is such a useless piece of information that it's confusing why it even came up in the first place. The only thing you can really do with this is explain some motive a murderer may have had to kill the victim. It's just too bad that knowing a motive for a murder is fucking pointless in a case like this, since the evidence speaks for itself. Maybe in some other context this would have been useful, but honestly it doesn't fucking matter in this situation. This will probably come up in the trial at some point though, so I'm not really looking forward to that, and you know what really pisses me off? It's the fact that this game has two-part trials now, but they've made no effort to improve these cases at all. These past two cases have been fucking cakewalks to solve because of how poorly the evidence was handled. Hajime is turned into this god of logic for everything other than the things he should be focused on. And I still can't believe that the first case, a tutorial of all things, was designed in such a way where it had to have an intermission. Couldn't that have been saved for longer, more complex trials? Why is it being used on all the introductory ones? Why focus on adding more to an aspect of the game that doesn't need it this early on instead of fixing the investigation segments? Did Kodaka really not see anything wrong with the fact that I can break these cases as soon as they start? Okay, you have a sequel to a game that the characters in DR2 even admit had a lot of flaws in it. There are constant jabs at plot points and references to characters in the older games that are tongue-in-cheek. For example, there's a moment when Monokuma made fun of the fact that he revealed the student's memory loss early in the first case, whereas in DR1 it was a big reveal at the end of the game. What I don't get though is why they focused on those problems instead of glaring ones that had to do with things like the plot, the characters, or even the structure of most of these cases in general. All I've seen in this game that's hailed as the good one has been a sloppy downgrade from DR1. And I'm sorry for not covering things like the Twilight Syndrome murder investigation, but again, all there really is to say about it is that it's an obvious red herring where the only criticism I can give it is that the other characters are focusing on it way too much. Apart from hinting at Fuyuhiko's past, you really don't get much else from it. Anyway, let's head on over to the class trial so we can see how all this bullshit comes together. Of course the first topic is Twilight shitty murder. You can't script this shit. We're really gonna waste time on this stupid fucking game. Oh my god, man. The entire thing is just a multiple choice test too, where you have to pair people in the game to people in real life. But for fuck's sake, why are they talking about the water bottles? If they can figure out when those were used, you basically have the case solved. This is such a waste of time, holy shit! And you know what's worse? They force you to solve the Twilight Syndrome case in full! Even after you pin down the culprit of the game, you actually have to solve how it happened because Monokuma wants you to. The only thing that comes out of this encounter is that Fuyuhiko had a sister who died while everyone in the main cast attended school. Then they use this as a reason to randomly suspect Hyoko of committing the crime when it's fucking obvious she didn't do it. Hajime and Kazuichi are witnesses to this shit since they saw her running from the crime scene. Her kimono was neither drenched in blood nor water, and her footprints outside of the beach house were dry too, so she's basically clear of all suspicion. It takes them 2 debates before this is even brought up in the first place. But again, no one wants to talk about the fucking water. Like, Jesus Christ, man, what is wrong with these idiots? You could have curb stomped this trial as soon as it started. Of course it can't be that easy though, because we have to talk about some stupid gummy bear found in the closet of the beach house. The only problem is, during the investigation, Hajime finds the gummies Hyoko eats, which don't contain the one Peko brings to court. And in case you're wondering, he makes no effort to connect this during the investigation. It's only during the subsequent debate that Hajime is allowed to use his brain. The rest of this discussion finally starts moving towards the moving of the body and how blood would have gotten anyone trying to move it. You sword fight Fuyuhiko, and then we get to the topic of washing the blood off after a crime was committed. The rule for the beach house was that no one was allowed to change in it, so Hyoko taking off her kimono to shower was impossible. Why no one came up with this earlier, I have no idea. And oh god, they don't even go down the path of logic created by this shit in the first place. Instead, they talk about some dumb forged note. It was impossible for the lolly to do the crime, you idiots. Water would have been all over the fucking floor since she ran through the front door, and blood would have been stained on her outfit. And now we're talking about some kind of forgery with notes? What? Who fucking cares about the notes? So bad. Like, it's just one piece of evidence. Why do they make it this easy? And come on, why are we still talking about how the culprit did anything? Oh, whatever, I shouldn't be surprised at this point. The cast is worrying about a gummy bear placed at the scene and wondering where the culprit hid since she was apparently present while Hyoko was still in the room. Then, oh my god, logic dive? What the hell is logic dive?
You think this is funny?
In a cosmic sort of way, yes.
Well, Mr. Funny Man, is this how you get your sick kicks?
What? It's just an ordinary crabby... Oh my goodness! Squidward!
Could someone please explain this to me? Why did they incorporate a thought route into this game of all places? The reason I got thrown into this game mode was because we didn't know the killer's true actions at the beach house. From there, I have to surf and select the right answer from 1 to 3 options. The problem with this is that there's already a mechanic designed for this. The multiple choice feature in these class trials can support up to 4 answers at once. That means that, as far as your deductions go, that mechanic is a better choice in this entire game mode because there are more options. If the chances for you to be wrong increase, it means that you have to have have some general understanding of how the crime took place in order to progress. If this entire logic dive were done through multiple choice questions, it would have actually been much better since they wouldn't have had to have modeled 3 different pathways for you to surf down. It could have saved the developers a lot of effort for what would have arguably been a much better idea. What kind of idiot do you have to be to not take that and opt for a flashy, inferior copy of a game mechanic that already exists? After you waste your time for a couple more minutes, you're able to point out where the killer was hiding in the beach house. Hajime concludes it had to have been in the closet near the body. Nagito then asks if the killer was among the group of students who found the body. Monokuma spurgs out because he doesn't like this, and I'm just confused because this, once again, really has nothing to do with solving the case whatsoever. The following debate is a piece of shit too. The mechanic where you can steal statements is back, and it's used in the gayest way possible. The debate is finally centered around how the culprit washed off. Chiaki says that it's possible something other than the shower was used, which contradicts Fuyuhiko's statement that washing off the blood was impossible. Except in case I haven't mentioned this enough already, there's a shitload of bottles in my inventory I could have presented at this point. So why do they have me do this, you ask? Well, the answer is simple. I needed to fucking sword fight Peko, who could have waited 1 second for me to present my evidence. And oh my god, finally! Hajime figures out who the culprit is, and guess what? My reasoning was right. It was the shit-eating swordswoman. All that's left is to sit through the most insulting part of every Danganronpa game. The part where you prove beyond a shadow of a doubt who the culprit is, but the game won't let you end the trial due to a bunch of stupid bullshit. Fuyuhiko starts lying, but Hajime kicks his ass. Then he starts whining about how the killer escaped, even though that doesn't take any suspicion away from Peko at all. As long as you can establish some kind of guilt for the fucking hell. I think you understand how terrible this idea is, so I'm just gonna continue. I'll move on to the way they even carry out this accusation in the first place. Hajime concludes that the only way to escape the building was through the window in the shower room. But what's weird about this all is that that very window is a part of your evidence. So let me get this straight. Twilight Syndrome murder case required a multiple choice test. Finding out where the culprit was didn't, but it got a logic dive instead, even though it'd be more efficient to have another test here too. And finally, I have to describe something I have evidence for, but the game opts for me to do a multiple choice test? What the fuck is the point of anything in this trial anymore? And holy shit, the next conversation is awful. Chucky says that an object could have been used to boost the killer to the window. Mikon suggests that the object was something the culprit hid on his or her body. And it's at this point where it's abundantly obvious what that object was. Anyone who was there when Peko entered the diner would have seen the bamboo sword tied to her back. Someone else could mention this before I get thrown into some kind of oh my god. Also, while we're on this topic, why didn't anyone mention this when Peko first arrived? She just arrives with her sword on her back in a fucking bikini, then says she was swimming around the island. What sword fights would she get into while she was out in the middle of the ocean? What about a trip to the beach with a bunch of girls would require her sword either? I mean, if it was this noticeable, you'd think she'd leave the sword behind at her dorm. If she was already late anyway, it's not like it'd make much of a difference. Also, how come no one brought any towels? It was stated that Sonya's plan was to go swimming near the shore. Unless they were just gonna bask in the sand the entire day like fucking lizards, there's no reason to avoid bringing them. The only person who ended up actually bringing shit was Chiaki, except all she got were board games and ice cream. And again, no towels. Oh wait, I know the reason. If Peko brought a towel, there'd be no way to prove she used the water bottles to wash off the blood because she'd be dry. Gee, it's funny how plot conveniences work that way. And you know what's sad? If it had just been done that way, the case would have made more sense. The water bottles at the scene completely shatter the case. Like if they just had the towels, this normal fucking thing for people to bring, by the way, it would have made cornering her a lot harder, which would have made the experience more fun. Jesus Christ. Okay, let's get back to fuck off! Fuyuhiko is still in disbelief that this shit happened, and honestly at this point, if he's gonna be this much of a cunt, you may as well toss him aside. No one cares what he thinks, he doesn't matter at all. It ends up being a waste of time too, since Peko just outright admits she did it. You know, maybe if she decided to step up and speak a bit earlier, before I got thrown into another shitty minigame, it would have been a lot more impactful. God, and Hajime, the stupid friendship that he is just going, "Woo-woo, Peko admitted it? Is this right? Is this the right decision?" Yes! Yes it is, you dumbass! You have enough evidence to prove she clobbered that picture-taking whore, so a vote for her would be fine. Holy shit, it's Chiaki, coming in hot with another serving of She says that we need to confirm Peko's motive for killing the feminist. No, we fucking don't! It doesn't matter why she did any of this. It just matters whether or not she did it. Which she fucking did! And Jesus, here we go. Peko revs up her count to become Sonya's wet dream, the killer's sparkling justice. This was completely shoehorned in out of nowhere. She even gives a speech. A fucking speech. The trial should be over and I have to watch the queen of shit deliver me this empty speech about justice. She doesn't even say anything either. It's just a bunch of empty words that rape my time playing the game. Thank God for Need Eye stepping in and just shutting her up. Cause now we can vote, you son of a bitch. The case was so conclusive that I almost forgot this minigame existed. I just couldn't fathom a reason as to why we need to continue the case, but DR2 thought otherwise. After yet another speech, we finally get to vote, and big surprise, I was right. Peko did it. Finally, the case is over.
Pardon me, can we please have a little more time?
What? Sonia? No! We don't need more time added to the case. It doesn't matter. It doesn't fucking matter. It's over. She starts wondering if Peko really is the serial killer, and again, who fucking cares? You even get more multiple choice questions and get penalized if you fuck it up. But outside of the context for the trial, this system shouldn't have any weight. What would happen if I game over? We voted for who the killer was and Monokuma revealed it. She was guilty. We hit the jackpot. There shouldn't even be a threat for doing this, so why? Why do we need to have an extension of the trial for more find the truth bullshit? This isn't emotional or case changing, it's fucking garbage. Also, do you want to know a fun fact about all this? If you haven't noticed in the footage I recorded, the text is on auto. The reason for this being that, while this was all going down, I actually just went AFK. Apart from the odd question thrown at Hajime here and there, I had no investment in what was going on because I had no reason to care. I'd spent about 2 to 3 free times with Peko, got nothing out of it because of how free times are structured, and barely ever connected with her. The main events portray her as the stoic lapdog who occasionally went to retrieve Fuyuhiko whenever the cast needed him for a one-off event. It's for that reason that I think Peko's entire motivations and belief system about her existence randomly got the spotlight at the end of this trial, so we can feel bad for a character we may or may not have talked to during our free time segments. She tries to argue that she's some kind of tool that Fuyuhiko used to kill the victim, even though Monokuma clearly confirmed that she was the guilty party. Now everyone's convinced that they voted wrong, even though they have no fucking reason to think any of this. She even proves herself wrong the second she admits Fuyuhiko basically fired her at the beginning of the school trip. You know what? I must be enjoying this wrong. Let me get into the right mindset. No, Peko, no,
Okay, I'll come rescue you.
no. Well, so sad, no. All this good wording, no. Anyway, let's end this shit. Babyface finally admits that he wanted dat pussy before Peko gets slaughtered by a bunch of robots. He also gets wrecked in the process when Peko breaks his eye or something. After all this, honestly, I'm just glad the case is over. When I go into a sequel, I expect to see elements introduced in the first game get expanded on or improved upon from what it once was. In order for developers to understand what worked and what didn't, there needs to be enough criticism for specific game mechanics. Now, a lot of times, you usually won't find any games journalists who'd be willing to criticize a game like Danganronpa beyond the average shit you'd see for visual novels like this. They'll say things like, there's a lot of reading, or the logic doesn't flow right sometimes, but it's overall a fun experience, or some other blanket statement about the game that doesn't accurately represent its quality. So the solution to this problem would be to listen to what the fans commonly say about the games. Developers and even writers on TV shows have, on occasion, gone online to check what the consensus on their work might be among the community surrounding them. Even if there can be some useless destructive comments here and there, fan consensus about certain things can be very useful when trying to improve a game if it were to get a sequel. The reason I bring this up is because both the fan and professional consensus for Danganronpa 1 was almost overtly positive. When I dug into DR1's Metacritic scores, no one seemed to be bringing up any of the glaring issues the game had. There seemed to be this weird state of content with what people ended up getting and a strong desire for more without asking any questions about what they played or critically thinking about whether or not what was shown to them was really as good as they thought it was. A lot of shit can go down when you treat a game like this, especially ones like Danganronpa which are very niche. Every single one of these problems comes up in Danganronpa 2 at some point. DR1 was not a good game in the slightest. It failed at almost every single thing it tried to do to the point where it was just a sloppy mess. However, that's not to say there weren't any good elements in that game that could have been used or improved upon. The thing is, DR2 is built in such a way where it treats everything in the first game like it was either perfect or it needed to be tweaked slightly to reach perfection. That's why we keep seeing so much nonsensical shit appear in the game, like how the class trials have several new game modes that are even more useless than the older ones, broken investigation segments, and a horrendous use of characters during almost every daily life segment. DR1 established a base for another game that was, excuse the metaphor, basically basically built out of sand. The core foundations that were established in that game were trash, and if the developers were planning on building off of that, the end product wasn't going to be anything more than mediocre at best. There's no greater example of this than if we were to compare the Danganronpa 1 class trials with the ones in Danganronpa 2 in a bit more detail. According to some of the reviews I've read, there's tons of praise and positivity thrown at the new minigames introduced in DR2. The minigames are treated like brand new puzzle elements for the players to solve when, in actuality, every single thing introduced was a complete and total downgrade from before. In the first game, the game modes were Hangman's Gambit, Moment of Truth, and Climax Reasoning. Of those three, the only good idea was Hangman's Gambit. My biggest problem with it in the last video was that it was totally useless because it oftentimes conflicted with pieces of evidence that could have been presented instead. But as far as deductions go, I think it's good in that it's a very direct way for a player to input his or her guesses as to the answer to some questions you've been asked in court. In Danganronpa 2, we have improved Hangman's Gambit, Panic Talk Action, Logic Dive, Rebuttal Showdown, and Closing Argument. Unlike the first game, none of these game modes work in the context of the story, nor do they improve upon anything from the first game. Panic Talk Action and Rebuttal Showdown are basically the same game modes repackaged from the Moment of Truth segments in DR1, so they're basically useless. Logic Dive is a lesser version of a pre-existing system in the class trials, so it's also useless. Closing Arguments are just as worthless as Climax Reasoning segments for the same reasons I brought up in DR1, and Improved Hangman's Gambit is just this wonky-ass version of the original Hangman's Gambit that still has the same issues with the evidence I've already collected during the investigation. So in summary, Danganronpa 2 took the broken game modes in DR1 and added its own broken piles of shit to make them even worse than before. Not only that, but the trials were needlessly extended too. So not only are these minigames horribly mismanaged, but the trials are also even more broken in terms of pacing than in the game's prequel. This is a humongous step down from where the game started, and that's just sad. What's even sadder is that the fan reaction to all of this is just a bunch of overwhelming praise and saying that it's the best game in the series. It almost seems like no one actually cared to think about how pointless all of this bullshit was. Now that isn't to say that I'm somehow superior to every fan of this series just because I'm more critical of it, but the main message here is that a lot of these glaring issues could have been solved if people were more critical of it than just not at all. If this sequel had just worked to fix what the previous game couldn't get right, then it'd be a much better experience overall. All the devs would have to do is shift the minigames so that they incorporate themselves with the whole notion of class debates and not just individual people bitching at the protagonist. The minute a minigame comes in and just disrupts the process of actually solving the case is the minute that minigame becomes too intrusive and needs to be removed. They need to have an in-story reason for it being there and not just some stupid horseshit Kodaka wanted added because he's a dumbass. I have a lot more problems with how these games are handled as well as more in-depth solutions to them, but I'm gonna save that all for a later review in the Dangan Chronicles series. For now, the main message I want to push in this intermission is to criticize the games you enjoy. If you're a fan of Danganronpa, at least try to speak out against some of the lazy horseshit if you want it to improve. Or if you think it's fine as is, at least recognize that it may not be as perfect as you initially thought it was. Because right now, as it stands, DR2 is almost worse than the first one. Chapter 3 is pretty underwhelming. There's another instance of everything being shoveled at the player too quickly, with the conversation about a monument dedicated to the dead students getting shoved aside in favor of an exploration of the new islands that opened up since Chapter 2 ended. In the interest of fairness, I'll commend the game for at least touching on the fact that the students are grieving in some way for their fallen classmates. But this moment with Yoko's altar still feeds into a much larger problem this game seems to have with how the daily lives are constructed. To put it bluntly, no one in this cast seems to give much of a shit about anything. We see a clear example of this while you're investigating the third island. Hajime comes across a computer which contains a large exposition dump about the outside world. First of all, this entire segment is lazy as hell from a storytelling standpoint. The biggest problem Danganronpa has is something I'll call a conflict of scope. Let's back up and examine the current story we're in at the moment. We have a set of 16 characters mysteriously trapped on an abandoned island, forced to fight for survival while trying to find a way to escape. The scope of this story is essentially confined to our characters on this island, solving murders and trying to get off of it. As far as we know, someone put them there. We don't know who or how, but that will most likely be revealed near the end. In other words, our attention as far as the story is concerned is centered entirely on the island and the students. The conflict comes in when you introduce elements like the laptop Hajime examines during this daily daily life segment. It's a stark reminder that we're not only in a murder mystery story, but a post-apocalyptic story as well. This world that Danganronpa takes place in is vast, and has gone through a series of extreme changes that led up to the situation DR2's cast seem to find themselves in. So now we have an issue here, where our attention and our ability to understand anything is confined to this island, and there's a vast wealth of information we don't really have access to because of this. At no point do we, as players, get to explore the outside world and see everything for ourselves. There's no opportunities to use environmental storytelling, which is a common method for post-apocalyptic stories, to actually give us a solid idea of what the fuck actually happened. This inability to explore manifests itself in the form of the long, monotonous dialogue dump we get from the computer. The game is to outright dump what feels like a gut punch of information on us because our understanding of this world is only restricted to the island. This is the same reason why, in DR1, they revealed that the apocalypse took place outside with such a random leap that it was unsatisfying as fuck to learn about. If you put your players in a prison where a visual of the outside world is nigh impossible, then don't make the actual world contain truths that are far outside of the realm of plausibility that we've been conditioned to accept up until now. Second of all, the reactions to this information are fucking horrible. We see the same ridiculous denial tactics the kids use whenever they're faced with something difficult, as Hajime just brushes this shit off like it never happened. He just treats it like it's bad fanfiction. The dramatic irony here is that, as people who've played the game prior to this one, we know that the dialogue saved on the computer has some legitimacy when Hajime and the crew doesn't. However, it's really fucking stupid that, because these kids hate asking tough questions, we're just randomly locked from even slightly looking into this new issue or working through it in some way. It doesn't even make sense why he'd do this. In the last case, when Hajime beat Twilight Syndrome Murder, he didn't even bother looking into it any more than one playthrough. As a result of his negligence, he had to replay the game because it may have played a role in the following murder. If this type of mentality had already been proven wrong before, why wouldn't he pay more attention this time around? Both TWM and this laptop deal with information about the world outside of the island, so why wouldn't he think that at least discussing this with everyone might be a good idea? It's like no one has any fucking curiosity in this game. They just walk into areas, act confused, then get an exposition dump about what the thing is, only for them to ignore it until it becomes important at the last minute. This is a mystery game with a lot going on in it. These major plot points can't just be pushed aside in favor of more free time shit. At least in the first game, even when the mysteries were sloppily thrown together, all of the discoveries about the school secrets were made by the students. You could see from cases 1 through 5 some semblance of a story about this school slowly coming together. When I see this shitty game, all I see is people doing the exact opposite. Like, how do you manage to be worse than the game that couldn't even get it right to begin with? Anyway, enough of that. After you search the new island, you find out that Fuyuhiko's being held in a hospital there after getting wrecked in Pekko's execution. It's around this time where we get to see our first actual character arc in the game. We'll definitely talk about this in much more detail later, so I'm gonna skip ahead for now and move on. There's a point after some free time segments where Ibuki wants to have another distraction for everyone, so she puts on a concert where she takes a verbal shit on the mic. Once her audible diarrhea ends, it's revealed that Akane has a death wish which led her to challenging Monokuma to a fight. In a similar fashion to how DR2's rushed every single event up until now, another bit of in-drama gets thrown at the students when Nekomaru gets shot for Akane's. Monokuma doesn't seem to give a shit about the fact that she broke the rules, so after whisking Nidai away, he just gives up on trying to kill her. I don't know what the purpose of that is supposed to be though. It's not like she unbroke the rules when he hit some dumbass who ran in front of her shot. He even tries to say that Nekomaru will just take Akane's place instead, but that would be a clear violation of the rules because he'd have directly killed the student who didn't deserve it. And look, my main point is this. Kill this fat titty bitch for Christ's sake. She's garbage and contributes nothing to the game. No one will miss her stupid ass when she's gone, so just get rid of her already. What kind of weird leaps in logic did Kodaka have to take just to justify her being around despite breaking the rules? Why would he even have a moment like this to begin with either? Why don't you just have Nekomaru be the one who broke the rules? It's not like it changes anything anyway. Oh my god. If it isn't clear why this bothers me so much, just wait until we get to Chapter 4, where I'll discuss this topic in a bit more depth than we did now. The game continues its trend of poor pacing and stupid ideas, with the motive for this case being introduced the following day. This time, Monokuma just infected random people on the island with a despair disease so that another murder will occur. The rest of this case is just dedicated to fighting off this shit until Hajime finds Ibuki's body in the concert hall. After running to get some help, he comes back, breaks down the door, and this happens.
Give me your attention, baby.
In case you're wondering, the answer is no. This investigation isn't very good. It's not even that big of a surprise anymore. I've kind of just come to expect it at this point. It's just more of the same, with Hajime not connecting things, as well as some blatant stupidity being demonstrated by everyone involved. The first thing Hajime notices is that the room is sweltering because of how hot it is. When you talk to Mikan, she says that she can't get an estimated time of death for the bodies because of the heat. Hajime then concludes that the culprit probably manipulated the AC for that very purpose. But doesn't he find that weird at all? That the culprit knew to check for that? During both the first and second cases, Mikan never made an attempt to figure out when each victim died. She only mentioned how they died when presenting her autopsy reports. The timing of the murders was always on Hajime to figure out. Not only that, but how the fuck would anyone besides Mikan know to account for body temperature? No one else has a background in nursing, so how and when did they come across this information? I also don't get how Hajime misses the fact that Ibuki has someone else's blood in her shoes, yet there aren't any bloody footprints on the stepladder. Wouldn't this raise a lot of new questions about the case? The blood had to have come from somewhere, and there's coincidentally another body at the scene. So wouldn't it make sense that Hiyoko had to have died first, then Ibuki stepped in her blood second? You even find a bloodstain that could suggest this when you examine the stage. Anyway, what else is there to talk about? Oh god, the movie. At some point during the case, Monokuma shows off some shitty movie he made that Hajime refuses to watch. The students believe that this movie was used as an influence for the crime, calling it an imitation murder. Hajime, out of curiosity, watches the film himself, and after it's all over, I'm just thinking, like, what the hell was the point of that? Imitation murder my ass? Like, what is this? This is the weirdest attempt at a red herring I've ever seen because the crime that took place was barely anything like the movie. Like, are these kids fucking dumb or what? The only character who dies like a character in the movie is Ibuki, otherwise the rest is garbage. Also, why does it matter if this was an imitation murder? Who fucking cares? Every single student but Hajime saw the play, so your suspect list is basically the entire class but one person. Wow, good job guys, you're really making ground with this one. God, Hajime, fucking Hajime. Is he allergic to using his brain or what? At this point in the case, you establish that the curtain in the music venue is oddly short and different from the one that was there before the murder. Then, you go to the hospital ward and establish that the one in there is fucking identical to the one in the music venue, is exactly the right size for the room, and can create the same effect as what Hajime saw in the video of the woman getting hung. Any sane person would look at this and go, hey, those two might be connected somehow. But what does Hajime do? He stumbles over himself talking to this gamer bitch because of and I shit you not, this is the reason, a troll fail. Is this really happening right now? Is the game gonna be this consistently shit throughout? It's like it's intentionally trying to be bad at this point with some of this nonsense they're shoveling at me. There's even a scene in the storage room where Hajime looks at this wallpaper roll with a torn piece missing and asks, what does this mean? Even though the very torn piece of paper missing from the roll was just added to your evidence about 10 minutes ago. Like, are you fucking brain dead? What the hell? Did you forget? Like, what? You just picked it up! The very piece of mysterious torn paper fits perfectly with this roll of paper, and Hajime refuses to connect it? Like, why? I want to know who the hell said these mysteries were good or interesting, because they're lying through their fucking teeth. The only reason these mysteries are mysteries at all is because the main character refuses to think, because it all has to come together in one broken-ass class trial. It isn't even hard to figure out who the culprit is either. Once you connect the curtains in the music venue with the curtains in the hospital room, it's not difficult to figure out that the footage Hajime watched in the morning most likely came from the hospital and not the music venue. This becomes even more obvious when you consider the contradiction with the blood on Ibuki's slippers. The only person who could have bled before Ibuki's death was Hiyoko, which means she had to have died first. According to Sonia, she told Hiyoko about the mirror in the music venue yesterday when she was struggling with her kimono. Therefore, she would have had to have been killed between yesterday and the discovery of the body. Since Ibuki was alive when you saw her the night before the body discovery day, she had to have been killed after you went to sleep. In other words, the crime wasn't committed the following day. If Ibuki was dead long before her body was found, that means that the person Hajime saw in the video had to be Mikan because she was the only person who could film herself getting hung in the hospital while Hajime was watching the live broadcast from the camera. As with most cases in the series, I didn't need to be in the trial room to solve anything. This will always be a huge problem with the series where they give you way too much information before you actually do anything with it. If these games want to improve, they need to introduce enough unknowns to where you have no excuse but to solve it when you arrive in the courtroom. Ace Attorney does this by having the prosecution acquire evidence of his own that you won't see until a trial day, as well as refraining from giving you all the evidence on your first 2 investigation days. Other games that don't operate on the basis of investigations in class trials, like 999 and the Sherlock Holmes games, have the player actively questioning his or her surroundings while the story or mystery is slowly revealed over time by his or her own choices. In fact, you'd be hard-pressed to find any competent story doing what Danganronpa 1 and 2 do. There are 0 competent detective movies, shows, or games that will assault the audience with every little bit of information needed to solve the case from the get-go. It's always presented slowly, one at a time, and the thrill comes from the viewer's ability to either think ahead of the investigation or watch as the characters react to the logical conclusions derived from such information. Even if culprits are announced early, storytellers can gain a lot from emphasizing the actual moment where the main character is hunting them down because of an attempted could escape or a trap that was sprung. If there are points in the story where characters do something irrational all for the sake of cheaply manufacturing tension, those points are considered major flaws in the writing. If we apply these absolutely normal standards back to this game, we have cases that are drawn out for no reason, cases that give the audience too much information before anything is resolved, and culprits that overstay their welcome because the game has no in-universe explanation for why the majority just can't vote at that point. For every piece of media I've seen trying to pull off a mystery story, I've always seen these standards get applied to it. On some base level, all the audience will require is that the mystery is coherent, easy to understand, and thrilling to unravel. Tier 1 and 2 cannot meet these standards, yet they're held up on a pedestal for some reason. This game especially. I've heard so much about how the ending to this game is its only downside, but look at this! We're only 3 cases in and it's already a complete shit show. This game is supposed to be the best game in this series, remember? But what am I supposed to latch on to here? These characters are sloppily handled. The story they're a part of has been a garbled mess up until now, and it can't even satisfy the base level requirements for a game in its genre. I know there are people out there who will enjoy the game regardless, which is fine, but let's stop spewing trash about the game's quality. As far as I'm concerned, the only thing I can get out of this is that this game doesn't give a fuck about you or your time playing it. Nagito starts out by wasting our time with a stupid, baseless accusation against Hajime. He tries to say that Hajime performed an imitation murder based on Monokuma's movie, which we know isn't fucking true, and everyone just goes along with it. I already explained this in the investigation, so I'll just move on. Anyway, Nagito says that the piece of wallpaper is relevant and Hajime should tell the class what it belongs to. And all we have to do is search for our evidence, and of course it's a hangman's gambit! And you know what? I shouldn't act so surprised because this is all Hajime's fault. He was too to figure this shit out early and put the fucking paper roll in his evidence. This whole game mode just came out of nowhere because our main character didn't give a shit about anyone else's lives. Just come on, man! This is so aggravating to see this game keep doing this every 5 seconds. So I get past that hurdle the game put up for no reason, and Hajime starts to wonder if the wallpaper is tied to the appearance of Hyoko's body. Which, no shit, Sherlock, of course it is. And then a fucking logic dive? Really? We just started the trial 10 minutes ago! What is this? This isn't like the Hangman's Gambit. I actually have the piece of paper in my inventory. Why can't I just present that and have a multiple choice explanation? It covered Hyoko's body. It's easy as fuck to figure out. Christ almighty, when will this end? They even have the gall to place a multiple choice question a few seconds after the dive ends just to prove how stupid that last segment was. At least Ibuki's shoes come up in the next part. I'd rather talk about it now than at the end of the trial before— Gundam, you piece of shit! We just had a minigame 5 minutes ago. Don't fucking do this to me! And what the hell is he objecting to? Ibuki stepping in Hyoko's blood means Hyoko died first. That's basic fucking logic because she was hung to death. You can't step in a bunch of bloody shit while you're dangling in midair. Oh my god, what is this? He tries to say that there was no blood at the scene when he never even looked at the fucking stage! He just stood around while the 3 horsemen of the class trial system did all the work for him. Who cares what he has to say? And holy shit, it doesn't get any better because now they're talking about the hanging video. They just established that the blood was on Ibuki's shoes. There's no blood on the stepladder Hajime supposedly saw in the clip. So why in the blue fuck do they think that that was her hanging herself? He just saw her walking upstairs too. She didn't even put the rope on. How do you know it wasn't faked? Just, oh my god, like did everyone leave their fucking brains at home today or what? Just look at this next debate. So they're wondering why Hyoko went to the music venue, and my first thought is, Sonya should know the answer to this. You end up proving Sonya's statement by presenting Hyoko's room key. What's shit though, is that I have a testimony directly from Sonya proving this. But instead of presenting it to the court, the titty gymnast has to challenge me for no goddamn reason, then I can present it. Why did Sonya speak up during the debate, but not before I got forced into a sword fight? It's her fucking testimony. You'd think that out of all the people in the courtroom, she'd be the first one to explain what she saw, not me. We're wasting so much time delaying conclusions we could have reached already. There are huge issues that people are just refusing to bring up. For example, no one's brought up the shit with the curtains from the hospital ending up at the stage yet. That would give them a huge step in proving that Mikon was their prime suspect. But because everyone's an idiot, you spend more time earlier in the trial proving she couldn't have done it than actually establishing her guilt. It even takes until after a long dialogue session after Titty Bitch's sword fight that the footprints in the stepladder finally come up. Why couldn't we have started from this point? Why did we need to wait this long to get here? Why do I get a hangman's gambit to prove the locations were different when I could just show these idiots the curtains? And why is that followed up with another fucking logic dive to talk about the location of the security cameras when, if you just establish where the real crime took place, you could easily figure out all of this shit out afterward? And why do I get yet another hangman's gambit to prove the filming location was the conference room when, once again, I could have just presented the curtains. Do you not see how much of a train wreck this is? What could have been done in one evidence prompt was extended out across 3 fucking game modes that didn't need to be there at all. All of this actually ends up leading to the accusation against Mikan that was about an hour overdue at this point. Like, I've honestly just given up. It's just been non-stop autism from this cast of characters to the point where it's fucking ridiculous. They don't even end the trial after you make the accusation, which is easy as hell to do because of the majority vote system. Instead, they talk about how Mikan's autopsy report was wrong, even though that's fucking meaningless. Then Nagito says that if she won't admit her crime, they can't end the trial. No, you dumbass! She doesn't have to admit shit! Did you forget how these trials work? This nurse is acting like a crazy bitch. She doesn't even resemble the same person we've seen up until the trial. It's so fucking obvious she did it. Just vote for her. Just fucking vote for her, for Christ's sake! They don't even do anything with her character when she breaks down either. Throughout the entire game, Mikan has been nothing but timid or a punching bag. This would be a perfect time to highlight that and maybe give her plausible reasons for snapping and killing someone. After all, even though it was predictable, I have to admit that she was an unusual choice for the culprit this time around. Yet do you know what the explanation for all of this is? After a brief, unnecessary debate, an unnecessary climax reasoning, and an unnecessary moment of truth, her motive is revealed. It turns out she caught the fucking despair disease, aka the bullshit disease. All she does in this form is scream about despair and talk in circles. This rodeo clown is supposed to be the villain for this case. None of what she says has any meaning because it's all vague terminology. It's implied that she's talking about Junko when she's referring to her beloved, but at this point in the story, that wasn't made very clear. It's such a fucking letdown and a waste of an opportunity to do something good for once that it really pisses me off that I have to experience this crap. The moments after she gets executed aren't even that impactful either. She dropped a few knowledge bombs about World Ender, everyone acts confused and pretends like what they saw wasn't real, and then Nekomaru randomly comes back to life as a robot? Like, Monokuma even tries to kill Akane again, but because he was stopped by someone else, he just chooses not to, I guess? You know, honestly, I think Kodaka chose the wrong job. He should have been a magician instead, cause he tricked him into playing this horse shit.
Danganronpa.
We start with some more shit storytelling involving the crew simultaneously dealing with Nidai's new robot form, grieving for dead students, and Monokuma introducing the motive for this case. It's about as underwhelming as it was in the last few cases, but this time is actually something that comes up that really bothered me concerning Monokuma. I actually really liked him in the first game, not for any thematic reasons, but because of how he was handled. Obviously, it's a shame that the rest of DR1 was absolute trash, but this is definitely a compliment that I think it deserves. The main purpose of the killing game was to pit the students against each other so the rest of the world could see what was left of its hope slowly eating itself alive with each passing murder. What complemented this is the fact that Monokuma, while providing motives to the students, never directly participated in a murder until it was time for the game to end. For example, in the first murder of Danganronpa 1, Leon had to have made the willing choice to buy into what Monokuma was offering as a reward and murder Sayaka. The only option to avoid doing so was always on the table, but his own desire to escape overtook him. In this scenario, the only role Monokuma took was that of an instigator. With a situation like this, each murder has more of an impact than it would otherwise. When someone makes the conscious choice to kill another person, especially one regarded as a friend, there are a lot of layers that can be explored here. Questions like what led them to take Monokuma's offer, who else could just as easily be influenced to commit the next murder, and what is the purpose of avoiding the killing game, can provide insight into the psyche of the students, their philosophies on life, and highlight the fragility of their relationships under the system like this. Sadly, DR1 doesn't do anything like what I mentioned in a way that could be called competent, as I spent about an hour and a half explaining. But hopefully you can see why it was important that Monokuma wasn't directly affiliated with the actual killing of another student. Before the end of the game, at most, the only thing he ended up doing was swapping a letter written by the victim in case 4 with his own, which didn't even have anything to do with how she died in the first place. Another important aspect of Monokuma in the first game was that he wasn't omnipotent. Sure, in a hand-to-hand fight with him, the average student probably wouldn't stand a chance, but the point I'm making is that his movement and surveillance of the school were limited to what Junko was able to see from her control room. Having a villain that's limited in this sense opens up a lot of avenues for how the students can end up taking him down. Engagements with him would be more interesting because, if the students know his weakness, they can even the playing field and end up coming out on top. Meanwhile, we could see how Monokuma operates within these limits to fight back against the students. This is why I praised the first half of the 6th case in DR1. There were parts of the school that Monokuma couldn't see, which means that the students who investigated those places or took advantage of his blind spots could effectively get the upper hand and expose him in court. The advantage in information would make complete logical sense given the environment the story is working within, which would make besting the final villain all the more satisfying. This is one major reason why confronting the culprit in Ace Attorney is one of its most well-known design choices. There's no such thing as the perfect crime, and exposing the culprit's lies on the stand make it satisfying to play because, no matter how clever and cunning he or she is, you'll always come out on top and solve the case. Obviously there are other problems with AA's system that can tamper with this point, but I'm just trying to give you a general idea of why creating a villain like this is a good idea, and why it works in a murder mystery game like DR. Now why do I bring this up? Well, the reason I'm doing this is because Danganronpa 2 did not recognize this concept, and completely botches it up in the span of 2 cases, with case 4 being the worst example of this. In short, Monokuma tricks the kids into entering a funhouse through a carnival ride near the beginning of the chapter. From there, the students are given the motive that, until someone kills, he'll refuse to provide them any food until they die of starvation. The first problem with this motive is that it's a direct violation of one of Usami's rules established in the prologue. The headmaster isn't allowed to directly interfere with the students unless one of them breaks the rules. Monokuma cannot put them in a situation like this because, if one of them dies, then they'll have died as a result of his actions even though they're completely innocent by the e-handbook standards. There's also the fact that this motive he set up is basically the equivalent of him putting a gun to the students' heads and slowly pulling the trigger. If someone kills someone else, it will directly be because Monokuma threatened to basically kill the entire cast if they didn't. The second problem with this motive is that it's way too overt to have any interesting dynamics come up in the case. The basic asked question of what would it take for someone to kill is answered by just, they didn't want to die of starvation. Not playing the killing game is literally suicide unless someone is smart enough to notice how badly this motive contradicts the rules. The question of who could be influenced to murder next isn't even something that comes up. There's no element of distrust among the students because having a villain act like this takes away the agency required to choose to kill someone. It's basically a point that's been rendered useless due to how shitty the situation they've been put in is. Finally, the question of what is the purpose of avoiding the killing game isn't even a question at all, because in this scenario, it's just, do you want to live or die because the bear plushie took your food away? I mean, I get that the choice to have a motive like this was to make Monokuma seem more menacing, but it's really sloppy when he does it in such a way where he blatantly breaks his own fucking rules. And don't even give the excuse that it was all one big lie either. He directly says at the start of the investigation for the case that he was going to continue doing their exercises that he was using to tire the kids out faster if the murder didn't happen. He also said that if the kids didn't eat, they wouldn't have made it to the class trial in the same breath. If no one died, they were fucked. This isn't even the first time he's done this. Akane was supposed to be dead, yet he's kept her alive for some reason. She attacked the headmaster, which is a huge violation of the e-handbook and deserves punishment. But he just drops the issue and it never comes up again for the rest of the game. This leads me to my second point about the case and the one before it. Monokuma is basically a demigod that can do whatever he wants without suffering any consequences for doing it. In case 3, he creates his own disease from seemingly nothing and cures it at the end when someone commits a murder. Even then, you could argue that this could have broken the rules if someone died by the disease, but there's a much bigger issue here with what this implies. Monokuma isn't confined by any sort of rules or natural laws in the world established for Danganronpa 2. He has full surveillance of the island, can be anywhere he pleases whenever he pleases, has a complete disregard for his own rules, and can conjure up and cure plagues instantaneously on his whim alone. Any possible resistance is utterly pointless from every angle. There's no foreseeable end to what he is and isn't capable of doing. So now you have this main villain who's untouchable and willing to directly fuck with the cast to get them to do what he wants in more overt ways than before. Which, that's not bad on its own, but take into consideration how the story has handled itself up until now. As of case 4, we've experienced 4 murders by 3 different members of the cast. We've had a character die and come back to life only to become a superhuman robot that's several times stronger than his original self. We've had a traitor running around the school that has gone completely unnoticed by the other students. We've got an organization called World Ender with a mysterious building on the island that has come into question for the last few chapters now. And we've just shown proof that the Togami we knew from case 1 may not have been the same Togami as the one who survived DR1 this whole time. Look at how much of a fucking mess this is. In the midst of all this bullshit, we're somehow going to shovel in a story about a villain who's basically God? What the hell? You can't just contradict your own antagonist's position in the story after 2 chapters and just leave it at that. There are steps that need to be taken to address this issue. How will the characters react to this? How will the dynamics of the killing game change? What new dilemmas will come up because of this? If there is absolutely no possible way to stop Monokuma or escape his game, then this needs to be taken into account. Do you now see why there's no way this topic is going to be tackled due to how much shit is going on at once? The students don't even point out this hypocrisy with the motive either. The game is actively preventing me, the player, from confronting anything going on here. We can't ask about the villain, why he'd contradict the rules, or fear that someone will break under the famine that's artificially been placed on them. Instead, it's more of the stupid friendship horseshit that just ends in what you'd expect it to, another murder. This game is trying to juggle way too many different things at once, and it's just sad watching it all collapse on itself like this. What's worse is that even if I ignore Monokuma's role in all this chapter is still a colossal, disorganized dumpster fire that looks like there was barely any thought put into its setting beyond the actual murder case itself. We start with another sloppy daily life segments where the students barely talk about World Ender and the Future Foundation for a few minutes until Nekomaru comes in and interrupts them with his soda eyes. These two organizations have been presented as if they're the heart of why these kids are on Jabberwock Island to begin with. People are nervous and uneasy because one of their fellow students has to be from this group. Yet all we get in response to this is Beefcake Bot shitting cola out of his face. The topic just ends there too, since Usami randomly appears and announces that the new island has opened up for the students. It's during their search that you find out about another feature Nekomaru was given by Monokuma. The way you find out about this is weird though. You're just randomly talking about one part of the map, then he randomly pops a clock out of his chest. Not only that, but he decides to go into excruciating detail about how the clock works. A moment like this happens later when there's a conversation about how he has a sleep mode on the back of his neck too. It's pretty fucking obvious that both of these things will come up at some point in the next murder. The game couldn't make it more obvious with how heavy-handedly it's presenting Beefbot to us. The game is treating him like a completely new character it's going to kill off in the same chapter he was just introduced in. Also, what's going on with this funhouse? So the students enter a room with the grape on the door, and after investigating the one with the strawberry door, Chiaki says that both the strawberry and the grape house are two halves of the same building connected by the center room in the middle. To test this, Chiaki leaves her student handbook in the middle of the room with the strawberry door and uses the elevator to see if it's still there when they enter the room with the grape door. Naturally, their test is a success and Chiaki's point is proved to be true. Well, except it isn't. Look at the angle the handbook was placed in the grape room, then look at it when they enter the strawberry room. If the two buildings were separated by the center room, then you'd expect to see the student handbook angled towards the grape door, not the one opposite from it. This is a clear contradiction with Chiaki's point about the funhouse, but no one else notices this or points it out. They just fucking ignore it en masse and go on about living in this shitty starvation game instead. I just wish, for once, our main characters would actually put some fucking effort into understanding wherever they are instead of just blindly accepting it every 5 seconds. This isn't the same as Hope's Peak Academy in the first game. We knew exactly why we were there, because there was an entire spiel at the beginning of the game that explained that we were playing as a character who was a student there. Everything was streamlined to where all you had to do was question who the mastermind was. In this game, we get a new setting that appears out of scenic nowhere that doesn't match up with the island that it's supposed to be based on, and no one fucking cares. And again, I want to reiterate, spending 6 to 7 minutes talking about something is not the same as characters adding depth to whatever they're talking about. There's even a point in the game where they try to add depth to Tit Girl when Babyface tries to console her over nothing. But of course she's too much of a dopey cunt to understand anything he's saying, so it all falls flat. I don't even get the luxury of feeling anything other than frustration at how pointless that scene was. We don't get Akane's opinion on anything other than whatever her little pea brain can think of. She's just this fucking walking pair of boobs that somehow managed to survive this far despite the fact that she should be dead. Anyway, after a lot of nothing, you wake up the next morning and go to the center room for your morning routine. Hajime opens the door so a wild ride can continue when this happens.
Here we are, going far to save all that we love. If we give what we got, we will make it through. Here we are, like a star shining bright on the world today. We keep on going, so we'll
I'd like this crime a lot more if the whole thing with the funhouse was actually addressed at some point. I mean, you get some evidence about it later on in the investigation, but that's about it. Hajime just thinks everything is weird and forgets about it until the trial. This whole issue is treated like it's something you can't think about at all until we're in the debate room first. Also, what the hell is going on with the victim? Obviously the motive for this case was to not die of starvation, but if you're gonna pick someone to kill off, why would you choose the most powerful man in the cast? The guy was able to tank a fucking laser beam the day before they ended up in the funhouse. What the hell was the culprit thinking going after him? Chiaki and Hajime are 2 point men in the inevitable trial afterward. These two have basically done the most as far as catching culprits goes, so why not go for them? They'd be easy as fuck to kill because they're a bunch of starving losers, so just beat Hajime's head in the middle of the night and you'll be golden. And if killing them was too much work, kill Nagito. For fuck's sake, the guy is more than willing to die and actively trying to help any culprit that comes his way. Take advantage of this shit for once. Based on the fact that the culprit didn't step forward after the murder was done, he or she at least wants to stay hidden until the trial. So why not use the guy who'll try to make sure the crime you committed is as solid as possible? Look at how shitty the Nekomaru crime became due to this. The victim in this case was practically indestructible, yet he managed to bash his head and chest in? What? Why establish that he can withstand a goddamn laser beam at close range, then have him die like this? It makes it so unbelievable that anyone could kill him with anything else. Speaking of which, let's talk about the murder weapon, shall we? There's blood in the corner of the pillar and debris from said pillar under Nekomaru's body. This suggests that the pillar had to have fallen before Nekomaru did, which could be possible if he bashed his head in against the top corner, which led to his descent. So at this point, I'm just gonna go ahead and believe that the cause of death was gravity, since the game makes it incredibly clear that the pillar wasn't pushed over or wielded like a weapon. Again, the same laser that punched a hole through his gut wasn't enough to put a scratch on his robot body. He got hit with the fucking bazooka and came out as if nothing happened. But Nekomaru falls a few feet and hits his head, and then his entire body gets dented and mangled as a result? Yeah, okay. It's revealed later that the doorknob on the strawberry door was all fucked as if something had been tied to it. This would explain the wire tied around Nekomaru's leg. If there's really no feasible way for him to have died without falling due to gravity, then it makes sense that he was tied to the door before falling to his death. But how come he wouldn't be able to break out of the wire when he woke up? What was stopping him? Did he just not have enough robot strength for that or what? And how did his chest get smashed in? Was it with that hammer? How could the hammer leave a dent in his chest, but a bazooka can't? None of this makes any sense! Anyway, at some point during our investigation, you get to play as Nagito for some reason. This is the only time you do this in the game, and already he kicks Hajime's ass into orbit. He's so fucking good at piecing shit together and actually working through how the crime occurred that I wish I got to play as him instead. Throughout the case, the more you ask people, the more he makes deductions about the murder. It's so fucking refreshing to see this that it made the introduction of the escape room segment feel like a kick to the dick. My progression throughout the investigation segment came to a grinding halt when I got to this binary puzzle. The idea is that the lights on the area you're supposed to enter the code in represent a 1 if they're on, or a 0 if they're off. There's supposed to be a code on the laptop near the keypad with a key as to how you interpret these flashing lights. The problem is that the binary number for 9 is this, but the number that appears for the flashing lights is this. This isn't the number for 9, it's the binary representation for 11. This confused me so hard because I wasn't sure how to interpret the keypad when its own code didn't match up with what I was seeing. So because I wanted to play an actual game mode I thought would be fun, I got punished for it. What's worse is that the game seemed to be aware of this fact that the puzzle was broken, so they have Nagito just outright tell you the answer when you talk to Usami. He just says, enter the code 9875. You can even skip the entire segment if you pay 100 mono coins. So I can either play this shitty tribute to fans of 999, or I could just pay my way to victory. How is it that in both cases the result is unsatisfying? After Nagito has an edgy moment that we'll talk about later, he ends up giving the protagonist role back to Hajime alongside all the evidence he's collected. He then reveals some shit about Hope's Peak Academy no one cares about, then we end up going downstairs. It's at some point during the Nagito portion of the game, he gave Kazuichi a compass and told him to ride the elevator with it. We get this compass back when we play as Hajime. He says that the compass rotated a full 180 degrees and he thinks that the compass is broken, which... come on, really? It's at this point that Hajime should be thinking, gee, the elevator doesn't work in the way that I expected it to. Nekomaru managed to die by being hit with the pillar in such a way where the pillar never had to be moved by anyone. And Chiaki's handbook was in the wrong fucking position when we first tested the center room when we got to the funhouse. Maybe, just maybe, I should be jogging my noggin a bit here, and I should be actually thinking about this longer than a fucking second. But no, we just get another look at the body, a shitty piece of evidence is added, and then we get thrown into the class trial. Remember how in case 4 of DR1, the trial could have ended after the first 30 minutes? Well, it looks like DR2 wants to make a sequel to that where the trial can end in about 1 minute. During the crime itself, the pillar falling over due to Nekomaru hitting it caused it to make a loud crash. This loud crash was heard by everyone except Sonya and Nagito. It's from this that Hajime concludes that the deluxe rooms were soundproof based on what Monokuma said before the case began. This ends up proving that Gundam had to be active when Fuyuhiko saw Nekomaru dicking off to his morning exercise because he heard the alarm clock go off despite being in a soundproof room. Why this didn't come up at the beginning of the case, I don't know. It could have saved everyone about an hour and 50 minutes of bullshitting around the trial. This is on par with the Leon shit from the first game, except now we're introduced to something this awful this late in the game. I'm honestly unimpressed, really. It's nice and all that we get to figure out the mysteries of the funhouse, but once again, we're dealing with people refusing to solve shit during the investigation and just fucking off to the trial. What's really sad about this all, though, is that whether or not you figure out how the crime was done, you still wouldn't be able to pin it on one culprit based on that. None of the evidence directly ties to anyone in the main cast, so you have to base it off of the testimonies of the people who were up when the crash sound occurred. It's the only event tied to something obvious at the crime scene that you need to solve who did it. And when you end up doing so, it's not even satisfying to face off against Gundam either. The controls for the one-on-one sections are so fucking wonky. I ended up game overing several times before I just stopped trying and started button mashing my way to victory. He even tries to give you some inspirational speech at the end about how important life is because he didn't want to just wait until he starved to death in the funhouse. This probably would have had a lot more of an impact if Monokuma wasn't a totally inconsistent piece of shit throughout the whole case. So congratulations, DR2, you managed to have a sappy conclusion that didn't even make sense because of how shitty the case was structured. Finally, we conclude with Nagito having more edginess before the case officially ends. Sorry this class trial segment wasn't that long, but there really wasn't anything of note to talk about. It was basically just as pointless as the last three. Danganronpa 2 attempts to accomplish something that the first game failed to do with its characters. It tries to have an engaging atmosphere where each one is interesting and has more depth beyond the apparent stereotypes that seem to be present in each one of them. The problem is that, on several levels, it fails miserably at actually doing this. To understand why these characters are garbage, I'm going to outline two different ways this story could have been told. 1. A small cast of characters goes through a series of situations where they learn to understand each other and develop as people over the course of the game. And number 2, a large cast of one-dimensional characters don't shine individually, but rather as a collective through the interesting, thought-provoking situations they're put in as the game progresses. Using these options, let's try to understand what Danganronpa is trying to do. Obviously, it has a large cast of 16 students, so option 2 is a no-brainer. These characters don't have much depth from the get-go, so the best use for them would be throwing them into situations that challenges the dynamics of the group as a whole. Except, the game never does this. In fact, I spent multiple tangents explaining how many issues come up and just get tossed aside in favor of something else, with case 4 being the messiest of the bunch. No one event dominates a chapter. It's always a series of things happening in quick succession that end up getting ignored by the main cast after being discussed for no more than a few minutes. If the game was really trying to accomplish something like this, then this would be fucking embarrassing. So I can only assume that DR2 wants to use option 1 then. Except we run into even more problems because this game wasn't built around in-depth character development at all. Just take the game at face value and you'll see what I mean. There are 16 fucking characters, where 2 to 3 of them have to die off each case. How the hell are you gonna add any kind of depth to these people without making it obvious who lives and who dies, or outright ignoring them for the sake of the mystery and just showing their backstories at the end of the case as compensation for this? Based on what I've seen for these 4 cases, that shit just isn't possible. It's like the game is trying to walk a tightrope between a mystery game and a visual novel after it's already fallen off the platform it started on. If you go beyond this surface level observation, it only gets worse. According to the first scenario, characters are supposed to go through some kind of arc. Danganronpa apparently agrees because it attempts to have several characters change as the story progresses. Hajime, Fuyuhiko, Hyoko, Sonya, and Akane all make drastic changes during several main events. We'll talk about Hajime later on in the video, so let's evaluate the other 4. First, Fuyuhiko. When you first meet Babyface, he's a shithead. He keeps to himself and talks tough despite not really having that much power on the island. It's also later explained that he struggles to gain independence from the family he was born into, which fuels his lone wolf mentality he has up until case 3. Once Peko dies, he presumably takes on the responsibility for her death and reflects on his actions. Finally, after coming to terms with her death, he chooses to turn over a new leaf and tries to work with the other students on the island. This is usually cited as an extremely good and emotional character for Danganronpa 2, even though it's a load of shit. Think back to Peko's execution. There's no feasible way to understand why he changed or blame himself for anything that took place in the game. According to Peko, as soon as he got on the island, he made it abundantly clear to her that their professional relationship was over. He does not, in any capacity, treat her like she's his tool. So when she goes off and kills someone on his behalf for no reason, the responsibility for doing so is entirely hers. Peko was just too stupid to understand how getting fired works. The fact that Fuyuhiko even takes on the burden for this is just ridiculous. The only reason he mourns her loss is because he had romantic feelings for her. You may also argue that I misinterpreted how Fuyuhiko handled the situation. You could say that he really didn't take the blame for any of what happened. He just mourned the loss of a friend. Which, is pretty fucking dumb to say, because the ending of Case 2 clearly suggests that there was more to it than that. It also creates a huge disconnect with the reasons for his arc taking place at all. Having him be indirectly responsible for Peko's death would allow his motivations and general demeanor to play into how and why he ended up changing in the first place. For example, the guy was never upfront with his feelings. You could tell based on how he acts in Case 1, when he's drawn to the party he deliberately said he didn't want to attend. The argument for why he'd take the blame would be because he was never upfront with how he felt about Peko, which led to her remaining stuck in her old ways as her master's tool. Except this is a really bad excuse. Again, remember, he fucking fired her at the beginning of the story. If your job was to be a tool and your boss says you're no longer my tool, then you're no longer a tool. You can't take away Peko's agency in this to randomly throw the blame onto Fuyuhiko so you can pretend like his arc meant anything. It also doesn't help that his entire emotional moment was thrown into, easily, one of the worst cases I've ever played in this series. As far as Fuyuhiko goes, his motivations made no sense, and they were all shoved into a broken chapter to boot. This is the only example of an arc being fully fleshed out from start to end, but being so poorly done that it ends up going to shit. Now let's look at how Hiyoko and Sonia change throughout the story. Hiyoko starts out as a bitch, she finds Mahiru and acts like a bitch to everyone but her, then Mahiru dies, so she's back to acting like a bitch, Peko dies and she's still a bitch, then finally, one day, she goes from hating Fuyuhiko to forgiving him instantly so she can attend Ibuki's concert. This was her entire progression in the main story up until she died. All of this was to portray her journey into independence, mirroring the process of a child growing up and relying less on their parents, in contrast to Fuyuhiko learning to become more dependent on others. On paper, if you write out this contrast and what the goal of this series of events was trying to accomplish, it's not actually that bad. But when you actually see how it manifests itself in the game, you see just how much of a confusing mess it is. Especially when you factor in the fact that she completely abandoned Fuyuhiko and Hajime when people started getting sick. She practically did a 180 from her apparent change the following morning. Sonia is even worse though. She goes from being a princess interested in Gundam's hamsters, to being a princess and being interested in Gundam, to being a princess who is no longer interested in Gundam because he's dead. We've really come a long way, haven't we? Apart from one brief relationship with a guy who dies in the same case the relationship starts, she's just the same person she was from the beginning. The only excuse you can give this mediocre piece of shit character's change is that she held on to Gundam's parting message at the end to do exactly the same shit she's been doing up until that point in time. Not dying. It also doesn't help that this message was part of another case that fucking failed miserably too. The last character who has an arc is Akane, which just ends with her deciding to get over her robo boyfriend's death and continue living. Even though she should be dead at this point because she broke the fucking rules. So fuck her and fuck her arc. I can't believe anything besides confusion as to how she's still alive, and now she just has mood swings every time something bad happens. The only time she actually shows some emotion is when she cries when Nekomaru dies, and then when she cries again at the end of the case when she wants to keep moving forward. If my point wasn't clear at this point, all of these character arcs are non-arcs that make no goddamn sense. And if they aren't changing, everyone is basically remaining static for the entire game until they die or end up being the killer. Kazuichi doesn't fucking change. He's still a pervert who wants to rip Sonia open from beginning to end. Chiaki is more of the same. She's just a gamer with big tits who's nice and hates killing. A one-dimensional waifu bitch who can do nothing wrong throughout the entire game. Do I need to go on, or do you get the picture? The only possible excuse you can give DR failing at telling its story using the two scenarios I provided would have to be the free times again. Thankfully, I don't have to spend too much time on this since there's an intermission in the last video where I go in depth on why it's a bad system. But there are still some points that come up when dealing with the characters that need to be addressed. Free time is not an excuse for character depth. It's a lazy, poorly implemented game mode that has no effect on the story whatsoever. No matter who you talk to or how long you talk to them, the narrative will always turn out the same way every time. Now let's go back to Peko again. If you complete her free times, she says she wants to ask out her childhood friend on a date. She says he knows that he's suffering and wants to give him a hand. When you finish talking to her, she says that she'll be sure to try when she escapes the island. But if she understood the plight he's going through, then why the fuck does she end up killing someone? If she kills someone, then she basically has to make sure that he fucking dies dies. And if he ends up getting off the island, then she has to die, making her goal ultimately pointless. In both cases, committing murder in this killing game is a horrible idea, but she does it anyway. As for cases 1, 3, and 4, the culprit is put into a position where killing is either necessary or out of their control, or for reasons that are totally separate from anything in their free times. But the thing I want to make clear is that the main story either remains stagnant or becomes worse the further you delve into this portion of the game. This stagnation doesn't just apply to the other students either. I know I mentioned this before, but it holds more meaning now that we're talking about the game that's blindly complimented for having good characters. If you complete a free time with any student, the only thing you get is something that slightly helps you in the class trials. That's it. It's a mode where your character sits there and listens to someone talk at you for extended periods of time, so you can basically get nothing out of it but an understanding that you've just had another backstory dumped on you in one sitting. Like, it's nice that there are people who make analysis videos on some of these students by reviewing their free time segments, and I appreciate the effort that comes along with that, but let's be fucking honest for a second here. Say you dissect Hiyoko, review her backstory, and come to a conclusion about her personality. So what? Hajime barely interacts with her in the main events, even though you'd expect him to if they really bonded that much before then. You aren't involved in her forgiveness of Fuyuhiko since her free times are independent of that plot point entirely. And finally, she fucking reverts back to her old self the minute Need-Eye goes comatose. She even tries to ditch you and the person she quote forgave when the despair disease acts up. Like, she has no regard for if we get sick or not. Listen, at the end of the day, you either like these characters or you hate them. No amount of me bitching about it is going to convince you if your mind's already set. I also usually don't like going over characters because different people latch onto them for different reasons. What I'm trying to show you though is that this cast is not as perfect as the fandom wants you to believe it is. In my opinion, they're shallow, underutilized, and consistently make terrible or illogical decisions. Whether you rewrite the setting, decrease the amount of people in the cast, or completely redo the entire trial system to accommodate the mysteries they're a part of, there's really no getting around the fact that, in DR2's current state, these characters fucking suck. There really isn't much to cover here. This case just begins like normal, and everyone fucks around doing jack shit until the next crime happens. Sonia tries to be useful when she calls Hajime's attention towards the future foundation building, but fails when nothing happens. Honestly, at this point, it's just gonna be the same until the next crime takes place. My complaints haven't changed, so I'll just say that this chapter is meh like the rest and move on. The game's nearing its end anyway, so I'm sure it'll be better to just get it over with. See you in case 6. Just kidding! This game is fucked! Where do I even start with this fucking mess? So Nagito is tired of no one doing anything, so he decides that it's time to ISIS the entire island if the traitor won't step up. Alright, first of all, where the hell would he get enough firepower to destroy the entire island? The only place I can think of is the funhouse. But if a shitload of bombs were there from the get-go, why didn't Gundam just use them to blow a hole in the funhouse and escape? It would have been a much better idea than killing someone and risking your life in the trial. And don't even give me that bullshit where the rules prevent students from fucking with the school grounds. Nagito was allowed to blow up half the hotel, and Monokuma didn't give a shit about that. So why would he care if Gundam did it? But then again, why would Monokuma put a bunch of fucking bombs in there to begin with? Why would he give one student the ability to just suicide bomb the entire island? Anyone who thinks about this for half a second could realize how fucking stupid this plan sounds. Second of all, how come no one just lies to Nagito? How is he gonna check if someone is or isn't the traitor? And I'm talking from the student's perspective here. How will he be able to tell if one of them is lying? As far as they know, he's clueless about the traitor's identity. So you could just pretend that one of them's the traitor and try to bullshit your way to get out of this situation. Third, why did it take Nagito threatening to bomb the entire island for anyone to give a shit about who the traitor was? You'd think that'd be priority number 1. You almost have to root for this Hope dumbass because of how shitty everyone else was being. But my god, the students. The fucking students! I've never seen a bigger lapse in logic than the sequence of events where they attempt to defuse the fucking bomb. So they end up finding the quote, bombs in the Monokuma factory. There's a laptop that tells the kids that the traitor needs to scan his or her card in order for the bombs to be stopped. But let's pause for a moment, cause holy shit, why didn't any of the students realize this was a lie? How would Nagito get the knowledge to rig a card sensor to the firepower of an atom bomb? How would his small pile of bombs even blow up the island anyway? If they went off, it looks like they just fuck up the factory. If someone wanted to blow up the island, why wouldn't they put bombs all over it? How much more of a mess is this story gonna be before I even get to the end? These kids are so fucking dumb, it hurts. The game doesn't even hide who the traitor is either. Chiaki just steps up and swipes her card while everyone else eats ass in the background. Well, there you have it, mystery fucking ruined. The traitor just revealed herself for everyone. But of course, because these kids have the IQ equivalent to bottled water's calorie count, they just ignore the fact that this happened to begin with. No one questions shit! They just dick around, open the door, and uh-oh, Nagito's dead! Fuck the music transitions. Can someone please explain to me why the answer is this obvious to how he died? Nagito's missing blood on his hand, and there's blood missing from the handle on the spear that got him in the stomach. There's even blood on the pole above where it landed. It's pretty obvious that that was something he was responsible for. And if he was the one who sent the spear down into his gut, who's to say he didn't orchestrate everything else? You even find some poison that specifically states it's dangerous when vaporized, and Monokuma said he had to air out the entire hangar because of hazardous gas while the fire was burning. Gee, I wonder where that came from. If the gas came on as the fire was burning, then it probably originated from the canisters the students threw at it to put it out. So oops, guess that mystery's down the drain too. What's even better is that the game spoils who the traitor is again! You end up finding Usami's notebook in Nagito's cottage. It's there that you read a portion that only Chiaki could have written. During Case 4, there's a scene where she appeared and saved Hajime from playing the escape room game. That very moment is cataloged in the journal. It's also revealed that Usami didn't write that entry either, so it had to be Chiaki. Not only did she scan her card, but she was also working closely with the rabbit bitch who's been running things up until Monokuma showed up. Not only is this crime fucking stupid, but we didn't even get to think about the traitor problem for more than a second before it got ruined by the game. This isn't even a hard crime to figure out either. It's obvious it was a suicide. It had to be a suicide. There's no other explanation for why Nagito would set everything up for the sole purpose of killing himself. Monokuma even says in Case 3 that the mastermind behind the case was considered the Blackened, not the accomplice. So whoever threw the bottle will be innocent. It all comes down to Nagito being his own killer. So we have a bogus-ass crime that's easy to figure out and a traitor that got revealed for no fucking reason. What a shit show this all is. I didn't even think the game would pull something off like this near the end. But my god, this is something else. And oh god, we still haven't even covered the class trial. The kids start by catching up to where I am by taking 30 minutes to actually talk about Nagito's fucking hand, which, again, should have been the first topic, but I digress. After solving that the knife was placed in the Monokuma doll so that it could be impaled into Nagito's right hand, the shit with the gun gear spear finally comes up. It was obvious he held it in his hand, but it didn't seem obvious to the students how it was used. Even though it's fucking easy if you just present the raptor with the bloodline on it. It proves that the spear was suspended before being dropped. But of course, because we're in this shit game, Hajime needs a fucking logic dive to figure this out when he has evidence that proves how it was used. And oh god, here we go. The kids are having their find the truth bullshit moment where they're not sure if Nagito killed himself or not. The answer is that he fucking did. They don't even need to go into detail about the poison. There is no plausible way it could be any of the students based on the rules of the game. I know Monokuma hasn't been a stickler to them recently, but holy shit, if he's just not gonna give a fuck about them in the class trials of all places, then what's the point of even having them? Anyway, Hajime goes into Hangman's Gambit and oh my god, what is this catastrophe I'm seeing right now? Look at this shit! What is this? All these letters that are just getting shit all over the screen. Like, who thought this would be a good idea? I know what the fucking word is too, but I'm just frantically trying to beat out this awful game before it fucks me over. And look at that! I was 3 letters away before the game raped me! I hate these minigames so fucking much! What kind of brain-dead idiot thought it was a good idea to add them? So finally, it gets to the poison and how Nagito managed to inhale it. Akane thinks Nagito used his dick to drink it, which is just like, yeah, fine, whatever. And I get thrown into another shitty logic dive for no reason. Like, seriously, wasn't I just in one earlier? And what the hell is the point of this? Hajime has to go down a slide to prove how Nagito inhaled the poison when there were several other ways this could have been done. I could just present the part of the poison that talked about the vaporization. Or maybe I could present something pertaining to the fire. Or maybe I could even just use a spot selection to choose his nose of all things to show that he inhaled it. Anything but this stupid fucking game mode that ruins my progress throughout the trial. Jesus, this has been nothing but shit ideas, one after the other. The crime is obvious as fuck and it's being presented in the worst fucking way I've ever seen for these games. They're even sitting around talking about how Nagito had an accomplice in his suicide. Whether he had one or not, it doesn't matter. He is the mastermind of the crime. Under what circumstances in this trial system would the accomplice be the killer when it was already clearly stated that they couldn't be? Also, why am I in yet another Hangman's Gambit when all I have to do is present the throwable fire extinguishers? Did Hajime really not put any of this shit in his evidence? It was all over the fucking floor. They all saw it. Why wouldn't you at least make a note of it? This game treats Mikon flashing everyone with her ass as if it was good enough to go in my evidence, but the actual murder weapon in the case is irrelevant? Really? And oh my god, they're actually going with this story that someone had to have murdered him. Are you fucking serious right now? None of this makes any sense. To think that Monokuma even confirms how impossible the crime is too. Like, what? Are you telling me he's just gonna toss out the rules again for no reason? What a load of shit! When he did that in the first game, it meant something. It was a huge ordeal that led to a retrial in the last case. It had a lot of weight in the story because randomly defining the rules on a whim cheapens the experience of solving anything. If the GM just does whatever he pleases, then where's the satisfaction in finding the right answer when he just gets undercut by someone else who wants it to be more dramatic? God, the fact this case is even considered one of the best in the series is a fucking joke. Everywhere I look, I see fans trying to justify this shit, but making a bunch of dumb excuses for why this stupid nonsense was allowed to happen. Some of them even pretend like Monokuma is doing something on par with DR1, when they don't even understand why it worked then, but not now. Is this why this game is considered the best? Because of a bunch of assholes pretending it is by making up a bunch of bullshit that's either never stated or completely contradicted in the game? They also probably think Nagito is a good character too. This stupid fucking luck cunt whose superpowers make no sense. It ends up getting revealed that his luck was the key in who Monokuma decided to randomly make the killer in this case. This whole crime was based on the worst ultimate in the entire series. This shit character who manages to say so much while saying absolutely nothing masterminded an entire case because the gods willed it. I spent a whole part of my DR1 video explaining why this luck shit was fucking dumb, because there's no way to discern what is considered lucky from what's considered unlucky. So why is this bullshit, blind luck, superhuman ability suddenly okay now? And you know what's even better? The only real way to understand how Nagito's luck works is if you did his free times. When you do so, he tells you that his powers basically work in such a way where his good luck always comes after bad luck. Yeah, that's right. The only way to know how this fuckface's superpowers even work is if you go through an optional part of the game. This doesn't even help this chapter either. Why wouldn't he just play a bunch of games of chance to manipulate the outcome in his favor? If I were him and I wanted the culprit to win that case, I'd just flip a coin until I lost so I could get the outcome I wanted. And don't even say it doesn't work that way, because I know for a fact you don't fucking know how it works either. This character is such a pile of horse shit. His powers make no sense. His motivations are underexplained unless you do his free times with him. And all he does is spew a bunch of nonsense about hope and despair like all the other trash characters in this series. I have to play a case where the rules randomly don't matter, the culprit is objectively wrong but is thought to be right anyway, and the traitor is easy to figure out. It's fucking embarrassing. Just, ugh. Alright, let's tone it down for a second. Let's not mince my words here, this is really bad. And I mean really bad. This whole case is a fucking mess. I honestly can't believe it. There's this whole scene where Hajime has to anime gasp to himself that the most obvious traitor in history was the traitor, while Chiaki sits there and just waits for the unfair accusation. And because this bland-ass character was accused of doing something, everyone has to cry now. Chiaki, whose only trait was to sit there, say she hates killing, and then fade into the background until the trial, is the person I need to cry for now. Maybe in some alternate dimension this shit wouldn't be so asinine to read through, but right now, nothing in the case made this reveal feel like anything other than forced. It's come down to a point where I'm pretty convinced that if you're a casual fan or someone who didn't like the series to begin with, I don't really need to keep going with why this is such a terrible and lazy decision. Apart from a few hardcore fans, I can't fathom how anyone can excuse the absolute incompetence taking place right now. I'm not going to waste your time with the events that happen afterwards, since it's just the aftermath of bad writing, so I'll move on. Apparently the next case is supposed to be something even huge fans of the game dislike, and if they manage to miss everything in cases 1 through 5, I can only imagine the ass that's waiting for me at the end of this wild ride. We're starting to near the end of the game with the last trial coming up after an investigation segment in Virtual Hope's Peak Academy. A lot of what's discussed during the investigation is something that we'll talk about in the next video, so I'm going to go ahead and use this time to just reflect on the game we've played thus far and maybe make a few comments here and there. After playing through what I've played through, It seems like it's gonna be very hard to make up and read through excuses for half the shit that comes up in DR2. DR2 manages to ruin everything that the first game did well, which isn't saying much because it basically fucked up everything. Its story is an even bigger mess than before, with too much shit going on at once, fucking over my ability to absorb anything going on around me. Sure, I noticed a bunch of themes like I brought up in the last video, but this just suffers from the same issues as before. Case 5 especially is given all this praise for no fucking reason too. They all talk about how brilliant the murder was and how emotional the ending scene was when nothing was earned and everything associated with the actual killing was inconsistent as fuck. It's like the case was one big asshole. Look at some of this shit. This game made me ooze feels? What the fuck? There's even a thread on GameFAQs where people tried to bring up similar points that I did, and it just results in all these mental gymnastics to try to justify why Chiaki should have died. People also want to pretend like this case 6, is the only bad one, even when we've obviously seen much worse in the past 5. Like I said in the first intermission, making all these excuses for the game's quality isn't going to make it improve. If you're a hardcore fan, you should be calling the game out for these things because look at what you ended up getting. The game itself even seems to mock the first one for things that didn't fucking matter, like when a character will just reference a plot point from the first game and talk about how cliche it is. But when it comes to the stupid minigames, no one says anything at all? What? They didn't even fix obvious tonal problems that were present in the first game either. When you enter a trial, the music is fast paced like you're in a rave, but the text and voice acting are slow as fuck. You have this crazy ass noise going apeshit in the background while someone meticulously reads the lines of the characters they're playing slow and clear enough for the audience to understand them. Nothing is being offset by this. The atmosphere and presentation are just all over the place. There's even a point in this very case that comes close to what I'd like to have seen from this game when you talk to Alter Ego. Every bit of dialogue is punctuated with a blip in the background for the text. I can't emphasize how refusing to use voice acting and using text speak plus a blip for each letter can boost how fast-paced a visual novel like this can feel. It's why Ace Attorney can have moments where Phoenix reads off several numbers at once and the text can still go by blazingly fast despite the fact that if someone were to read that shit, it would be really underwhelming. Having a bunch of static lines just fly all over the place is boring to look at and everything just feels 100% slower as a result. Not to mention the mini-games that add to this with how intrusive they are. It's honestly really hard to give this game credit for anything because nothing works. So why did I emphasize all of this now? Why did I take the time before the games even ended to describe how bad it is? Well, remember what I said about this case being the only one in the game that fans seem to dislike? How this case is honestly the only fault they can find with the game? Here's the thing. I played through both cases 1 through 5 and I can tell you for a fact, right now, that Danganronpa 2 is worse than Danganronpa 1 by a long shot. This is, hands down, the worst game in the series by far. It's that bad. Now, with that being said, let's finish what we started. This case is ridiculous. Almost the entire thing is exposition where Hajime just fills in the blanks that Monokuma gives him. But it's hardly anywhere near the amount of fun it was to confront him in the first game. Monokuma's an all-powerful demigod who has complete dominance over everything, so it barely even feels like I'm making any progress figuring anything out. It doesn't even accomplish the idea that we feel despair because there's no beating him. It's just underwhelming because I'm literally making no progress in the game. I just keep going until I hit whatever wall it throws at me next, only to realize that the only way out of this is going to be some Deus Ex Machina moment. In DR1, when you fight Monokuma, at least you revealed everything on your own merits and the whole despair thing was safe for the end. Here it isn't even a fair fight. We've basically lost the minute we've started. And what the hell is going on with exposition shit anyway? Just listen to some of this.
'Cause it's a game!
Then we were forced to kill each other.
'Cause it's a game!
A lot of crazy shit happened.
'Cause it's a game! We're the only people here. 'Cause it's a game!
Monokuma's nonsensical abilities.
Did they not notice how stupid that sounded when they were writing this? The way this is all presented is so heavy-handed too. There was an entire investigation where all you did was walk around to get dumped evidence only for the sake of this mystery and nothing else. In any other case this would be normal, but this is the overarching plot. You don't dump all the information about the entire story for the game in one segment. The only reason they had to do it like this was because the conclusion to all of this was so fucking massive that it couldn't be squeezed into a narrow amount of space that they gave during the main events. Everything is so fucking sloppy. All these questions about everyone's school memories are coming up now when this should have been something they first focused on. Monokuma announced in the first fucking chapter that they all had amnesia and only now is it an issue? You even bring up how Fuyuhiko remembered Peko, but not the time they spent during the 2 missing years from his memory. Could you not have realized this sooner? It may have helped to have given you a head start at figuring this out, or at least something for the audience to latch onto, so this reveal doesn't feel so fucking ridiculous. This is the weirdest take on the Matrix I've ever seen, too. It took the length of a feature-length film to just establish this one concept and its logical implications, but we're gonna do it all in just one trial? And what the fuck is going on with this explanation for everyone being here? So they're all part of the remnants of despair who caused the tragedy mentioned in the first game. Then Naegi, who just shown up out of nowhere to give exposition, tells us that we aided in spreading Junko's autism. At one point it's even revealed that they transplanted Junko's body parts on themselves. Like, what the fuck is this group? Naegi even says that this little group felt the despair of starvation. They killed their own families? They slaughtered thousands of people? What? Someone put Junko's eye in their eye and they even fucked her dead corpse? What the fuck? What the fuck is this? What is this? This is what happens when you don't prepare the audience for a bunch of stupid bullshit thrown at you at once, because I can't believe what I'm reading right now. How did this even happen to begin with? Why weren't they stopped by anyone? What fucking movement like this would even be able to compete with every single army in the world to where they take it over? Why do they even need to add so much crap to an already terrible story to begin with? There's an entirely new faction now started by Naegi that tried to counteract the apocalypse. Like, what? Why is this a continuation of the first game's trash? The game acts like half of the shit it brought up was a bunch of dumb fanfiction, yet it decides to continue adding to it anyway? Didn't they learn anything from the last game? Boy, this is something else. So they proved that Naegi is fake because he didn't know why the code the original chose for this one part of the map was 11037 from the first game. I don't understand how he didn't know this when this came up in the first fucking case of the first game. Monokuma even has all the files on that shit. How did he not know about the very first crime? Whatever, there's probably some explanation somewhere that I missed. But enough of that. He's talking about some kind of final transformation and I'm so confused. Like, oh my god, what is happening? Like, what is this? Yes, of course. Of course Junko had to come back. It wouldn't be Danganronpa if they didn't shoehorn her in somehow. Yo, this is such a fucking mess. The big three main characters from the first game are just randomly back now and are facing off against the giant Junko who's been talking about her tits since she got here. Junko brings out this paper talking about who is and isn't despair, Naegi is shitting about how hope must conquer despair, there's now a forced shutdown, and half of the surviving cast from the last game just randomly appeared. I still don't understand a thing about any of this because I'm being pile-drived by it all in one sitting. Junko's motivations are still unclear. She still raves on about how meaningless hope is because there's despair or something, but I don't get it. She doesn't explain herself. She's trying to make all these sweeping statements about these topics, but none of what she's saying has any worth to it because no one's established what any of this shit means yet. I've spent the entirety of my time on the island seeing a bunch of idiots die pointlessly. Is that despair? Is Junko wanting to upload her consciousness into humanity despair? Is this logic dive where it had to give me a prompt this lazy despair? She even reveals that the entire main cast set up the killing game themselves when they were evil. Like, why? All I want is a clear explanation for anything. All I'm getting is more characters, more speeches about nothing, and Junko bringing out diagram every 5 seconds. Hajime, if you upload yourself into the graduates, then I become you, and you become a skeleton. But if you choose free will, then I become despair, and you become despair, and I die, but you live, and I become your consciousness. They're even dumping on this new character who has the ability to control every talent in humanity named Izuru Kamakura. Thank God I'll be talking about him in the next video because I don't know if I can take much more of this shit. There's even another scene where Hajime has to bust out the future bullets so he can blast the asses of everyone else in the cast. It's just as gay as the first game was, and it's even more obnoxious with how much fluff is spent getting to this point. It even uses the gaming bitch as a crutch for Hajime to get a bad case of the blue ball so he can feel empowered enough to save the day at the end. What'd I tell ya? Another fucking cop-out courtesy of the madman Kodaka himself. Fuck this case and fuck this whole series. Let's be honest, it'd be a waste of time to identify all the underlying themes in this game because, as I made it clear in the first video, they aren't indicative of the game's overall quality. DR2 is basically like DR1 in that all of its ideas get overshadowed by a ton of bullshit being shoveled at the player to the point where it's hard to really focus on any sort of message it's trying to push. So as a result of this, I'm going to talk about something I feel is a bit more important to the overarching story, that thing being talent. There's an interesting speech by Nagito at the beginning of Case 2 where he describes the idea of those who are born with or without worth. Even though the students toss aside what he has to say immediately without thinking about it, I still think these ideas basically represent a huge facet of DR's world that goes relatively unexplored for most of the series. Danganronpa is set in a universe where high school students are the pillars of the future. Those who are able to do extraordinary things are coddled by the community surrounding them in such a way where they're treated like humanity's last hope. But the question I don't see getting asked as a result of this is, what does it mean to lack an ultimate? What happens when you aren't as capable as your peers in this society? Danganronpa provides us with two different viewpoints on this in the form of Hajime's experiences versus Nagito's worldview. Nagito believes that people who aren't born talented are worthless to society. The idea that someone can put enough effort into becoming better at any given task is meaningless in the grand scheme of things when there are those who are born special and deemed as such by society. For example, what value does someone hold who trains their whole lives to be a detective when there's a high school student who was born into a family that's naturally thrice as good as they are without even trying? No matter how hard someone tries in this world, natural talent, a trait that seems to be passed down at random, is something that can never be surpassed by what he calls normal humans. What's interesting about his belief system is that in any other context of this game's overall setting, it'd be true. The logical extremes to a world that operates on the basis of exceptional students being elevated above the rest would definitely result in people who basically share the same opinion as the one being expressed here. This thought process will also help in understanding what led to the tragedy, but I'll save that for the next video. Anyway, Nagito's opinion essentially becomes the basis for Hajime's arc. From the beginning of the game to the end, Hajime's progression as a character is fueled on confronting these ideas head-on through the events that take place in the game. If you notice when I was describing the truth value of the whole talent versus talentless idea, I said it was true in any other context of the game's overall setting. But what I didn't include was the case in which this claim falls flat, the killing game. What's funny about DR2 is that Nagito maintains these beliefs despite being put in a scenario where he's blatantly proven wrong over and over again. Monokuma's killing field trip is a massive equalizer for the students. Talent is irrelevant in a situation like this when anyone can kill with any of the methods he provides for them. In fact, using your ultimate in a game like this is basically detrimental to the killer's plan in each case. Teru being the chef made him the most likely suspect in terms of who could use the meat skewer that killed Togami. Pekoyama, being a swordswoman, used the hilt of her sword she carries around to escape the bathhouse after killing Mahiru. Mikan tries to use her skills as a nurse to forge a lie about the cause of death for Ibuki to throw everyone off of the case since she'd conducted the autopsies up until that point. Gundam could only have beaten Nekomaru with the help of his hamster since he needed to find a way of hitting his shutoff switch. And Nagito's crime was entirely based on his luck determining who ended up being the culprit. What's even better about this whole scenario is that the people who would lead most of the trials consisted of the same people Nagito deemed unworthy at one point in the story or another. Nagito thinks of himself as trash, that his talent is worthless and that he belongs on the same tier as the average Joe, while Hajime is just a normal student brought into Hope's Peaks Reserve course. However, it's these two people that contribute the most in terms of catching the killer to the point where they're basically single-handedly saving everyone's lives in one way or another. This coincidentally demonstrates Danganronpa 2's overarching message of being confident in yourself. Hajime is someone who used the reputation of Hope's Peak Academy to feel like he belongs somewhere in the world. Because he lacks any extraordinary abilities, he desperately tries to fit in by buying his way into the main school. It's at the end of the game where this lack of confidence is confronted by Chiaki's ghost when she explains to him that he shouldn't give up hope and bank on the excuse that he couldn't do anything about it. Your future isn't determined by society's view of you, it's determined by your actions and your actions alone. This message is even echoed by the confrontation Hajime has with what seems to be himself. Izuru is just a version of himself where he's inherited every talent that was humanly possible. Giving up and accepting that as his identity is equivalent to giving up and accepting what Izuru represents, the idea that talent's all that matters. Again, we have another message of keeping your head up, believing in yourself, and creating a future of your own choosing independent of outside influence. That is what I believe Danganronpa 2 is all about, and how talent plays a huge role in this. So, what does this mean for the it means nothing? I don't know what you expected, honestly. I already said that these messages are worthless when the game can't present them well at all. Especially when they use talent of all things to send out some kind of message. Just think about that for a moment. I railed on the talents of the kids in both games because of how little sense they made. Why would you make this broken aspect of the world the center of your game? What logic went into that decision? And on characters like Nagito or Hajime, there isn't really much to say beyond the fact that these messages were obviously obscured by the bullshit surrounding them. I spent a lot more time dissecting this shit in the last video, so I won't waste any more time on it here. The only thing left for me to do is answer one last question. Should you take Danganronpa 2 seriously? Yes. But come on. What the hell did I even play? What was this supposed to be? Everything this game did was fucking awful. There are so many embarrassing moments I either didn't spend enough time on or just flat out skipped over to get most of this shit done. What a disappointment of this game this turned out to be. Like, holy shit. When the first game manages to do what you're trying to do better, that's really fucking sad. Like, just look at our main character. Hajime is an even bigger dumbass than Naegi was. When Naegi would find pictures around the school, he wouldn't ask any questions about them and would just move on. That was really shitty, right? Well, when Hajime finds large blocks of text that outright spell the mystery out for him, no thinking required, he just shrugs it off like it's all fake. Like, hello? You're trapped on this island with a bear who can bend time and reality, a rabbit who basically transported your asses to an island from a school with just the wave of a magic wand, and an island that's supposed to be a tourist trap that was repurposed for something completely different. Don't you think that it's even slightly possible that there could be a bit more going on here than you're willing to admit? There's even a scene in Case 5 where Sonia and him find out that the Future Foundation building on the second island had a key code on it. I just want to let that set in for a second. It took them until Chapter 5 to actually look into something found in Chapter 2. What excuse is there for this? This entire story is just a huge mishmash of ideas thrown together without any regard for how they work at all. Monokuma evolves from being a simple animatronic to being this ungodly, unquestioned demigod that can infinitely reproduce himself. Rules are introduced, forgotten about, and just outright ignored for some random bullshit that seems to be introduced into the story. These characters are horrible. They're all either poorly used or go through the most nonsensical arcs I've ever seen. To even have an entire character built around something that's vital to the solution of a case that you can only find out through his free times. And don't even get me started on these god-awful trials. The new level of shit they've descended to is unreal. The mini-games are almost all pointless now. There is not one redeeming quality about them. They just take up space even though there are several other mechanics that could have been used to save the designers time, resources, and energy. The idea that there's now 2 mechanics for facing off against an opponent in a 1v1 debate is just silly. Why have all this redundant bullshit piled one on top of the other? Again, the first game had horrible minigames, but at least they didn't suffer from this trash. It's amazing the logic they had to go into including half of this garbage. This is so bad. This game is so fucking bad. I didn't think the first game could be topped this easily in terms of how low this series is willing to sink. Honestly, the only good thing about this is that it's over and we can finally move on with this shit series. In the next video, I'm going to talk about the finer details of DR's overarching story. Until then, I'm going to finish off this video by saying this. Fuck this game, and fuck the dumbass fans who try to use it as an excuse to defend other games in the franchise. This is such a pile of horse shit that they just look fucking embarrassing at this point. Hey jackasses, learn to criticize your game so I don't have to.
You guys, you can't buy into this. Think carefully about which is true hope.
And which is true despair.
Take